My mom said my presence would ruin the trip, so I canceled everything they planned with my money and watched it all fall apart from afar. They planned the perfect family vacation, every hotel, every train, every glass of wine in Tuscany, without telling me a word. But they made one mistake. They used my money. My mother grabbed me aside and said, "Next week is special, and you being there would ruin it." My father added, "You're too different now." I clinked my fork to my glass. Duly noticed. That night, I reversed all Italy charges, locked their URL passes, and canceled their airport connections. At check-in, they were denied everything. My brother's text arrived first. "Unblock the account now," I responded. I was so enraged that I couldn't sleep. They arranged everything without me. A perfect holiday in Italy, from Venice to Florence to Rome. Everything was meticulously planned. Luxury hotels, high-speed trains, exclusive vineyard tours in Tuscany, and dinner reservations at restaurants where you must know someone to even be on the wait list. They planned it on their own and utilized my money to do it. Not one mention of me. Nor my name, nor my daughter Lily's, nor my son Ethan's. Just my mother, father, sister Brooke, her husband Tyler, and their 2 children. That was the family they envisioned, the one that counted. It hit me when I received the email confirmation. It wasn't intended to come to me. Brooke must have forwarded it by accident. It showed everything. Dates, passengers, and the schedule, and it felt like someone punched me in the chest. I sat there rereading everything, hoping to see my name somewhere in the footnotes. It never arrived. Mom proposed the idea 6 months ago during one of our regular Sunday dinners. She stated that she had always wanted to take a large family trip. She stated that she wanted the kids to experience Europe while they were still young. She added that Brooke and Tyler were short on cash and asked if I'd be prepared to help handle the initial expenses. She said she will settle it later. Without hesitation, I replied, "Yes, of course." I recently secured a large consulting contract and wanted to do something special for the family. Something that would help us become closer. I paid for the entire thing. Flights, hotels, boarding cards, and so forth. Then they cut me out altogether. I didn't approach them immediately. I waited till Sunday. They were all there, acting as if nothing had happened. Mom prepared baked ziti as if it were just another Sunday. Dad spoke about golf. Brooke sat there smiling, as if the knife had not already been twisted. After dinner, I casually mentioned the trip, saying, "Ital sounds beautiful this time of year." Silence. Mom looked at me and said, "Next week is just special, and having me there would ruin it." Dad leaned back and remarked, "You're too different now." Nobody disagreed, none of them spoke up. It seemed as if they had all practiced it. I clinked my fork against the glass. Duly noticed. I did not argue. I did not ask for an explanation. I took my kids home and helped them prepare for bed. And once the home was quiet, I began to work. Everything remained in my name, including hotel rooms, passes and transfers. They hadn't touched the bill. They did not even have the decency to conceal their arrogance. I reversed each charge one by one. Freeze the travel cards. I locked the train passes. We canceled the transfers. The hotel reservations are no longer Lily-illable. I sat back and watched everything burn. Tyler sent his first text message at 7:42 a.m. the next day. "I've unblocked the account now." I said, "Sorry, I'm too different now." Then followed the calls from Mom, and emails from Dad. Brooke texted me a screenshot of her crying daughter and claimed I was being unkind, but I did not respond. They intended to focus this trip on their family. Okay, let them find it out on their own expense. They were still unaware that this was only the beginning. They strutted into JFK like they owned it. First-class tickets with matching baggage sets. Tyler even wore loafers without socks. He seemed to believe that this automatically made him European. Brooke's Instagram story, captioned, "Chia Bella," featured a boomerang of champagne glasses clinking. I wasn't even upset at that point. I was simply waiting. They had no idea anything was gone. I had not just reversed the costs and canceled the appointments. I had contacted each motel and described the scenario. Canceled the Rome airport car service and the Chianti Vineyard excursion. I reported the URL passes as stolen. Changed the login information for the travel portal. Left no sign that the journey was ever theirs. I knew exactly when it began to fall apart. Their flight was scheduled to board at 6:40 p.m. At 6:12 I received a text from Tyler. "Why are we denied boarding?" Then, "Brooke, did you cancel the flights?" Then came a flood of calls. Everything is neglected. It must have been chaotic. 4 parents and 2 children stood at the gate, astonished, trying to figure out why a trip that was meant to be completely paid for suddenly did not exist. Brooke may become loud. Tyler pretends to be calm. Dad attempting to assert some fictitious authority. Mom is probably just standing there mad. Someone told her no. I sat in my kitchen with Lily and Ethan, helping them bake pizza from scratch. They knew nothing. I wanted it that way. They continue to believe that Grandma and Grandpa had to cancel their vacation due to unforeseen circumstances. Approximately 9 p.m. The text's tone shifted. Tyler, you are acting psychotic. You're harming your own family. Brooke, your children will hear about this someday. I did not respond either. I allowed the silence to work. Then Dad sent a message that nearly made me chuckle. You have embarrassed us. I said, you've gone too far. I hope it was still special. Next morning, I noticed their car in the driveway. They returned 20 hours after flight, defeated and drained. That's when the new game began. The second stratum of this entire tragedy. At 3:47 p.m., the doorbell rang. It was Mom. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Her tone ranged between neutral and annoyed. She did not begin with an apology. Not even close. She said, "All right, you have made your point." I let her speak. She went on to say how such acts build wedges in families. I needed to be more tolerant, and it wasn't fair to spoil something they had planned for so long simply because I felt excluded. Following this, she stated, "Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about the backyard. The contractor's still scheduled to start next month and we don't want to lose the date. Your dad said you might be able to help cover the deposit." I gave her a look. She truly believed I would come around. Some part of me still wanted in. That money was simply something I would always provide because that is what I had always done. I nodded slowly. "Let me check my accounts," I said. "I'll let you know by the end of this week." She smiled as though she had won something back. She left satisfied. And that was ideal, because it was now my turn to play. The silence was strategic. I could tell they were allowing me just enough space to save face. Calculation, not respect. In their views, I was presumably sulking, regretting my actions at the airport, and running out of steam. They expected me to return with a check and an apology, as I usually did. They didn't comprehend that something had finally shattered in me. On Thursday, the first feeler arrived. Brooke texted as if she were contacting a coworker. "Hey, Mom mentioned you were thinking about helping with the backyard project. Please let us know so that we can confirm with the contractor." There was not even one question in there. There was no warmth, only the blank family tone they used whenever they needed anything. I left it unread for several hours. Then I replied, "We're still sorting things out, we'll let you know soon." That quickly changed into tomorrow, then the day after. By Friday morning, Mom had sent a longer note. "The contractor requires the deposit today to hold the schedule. We're attempting not to miss the fall installation window. Could you confirm?" I wrote back. "I might be able to ship half. Let me check with my bank." I did not check anything. Saturday, nothing from me. Sunday is still peaceful. Monday, Dad called. I watched his name appear on my screen and let it ring out. A minute later the text arrived. "We are not attempting to put you under pressure. All we need is to know what's going on so we can plan accordingly." I texted back. "I totally get it. Should get an answer soon." And I let it stretch again. Brooke sent a voice memo on Wednesday afternoon. I didn't even listen. Just looked at the waveform. She was most likely pretending to be kind, understand, and act as if everything was normal. Later that night, I finally responded. "Talk to the bank today. Small issue with a flag transaction. I think I can send it by Friday." That was the final hook. The one who made them wait again, made them circle another date on the calendar in anticipation. Friday arrived and passed. No payment, no message. Saturday morning, Dad wrote, "We told the contractor we'd handle it ourselves, don't worry about it," followed by a different message from Mom. "If you still wish to contribute later, every bit helps." I could sense the frustration building beneath those remarks, not because of the money, but because I wasn't doing what I was used to doing. Save them. Smooth it all over. Make the discomfort go away. And now they were trapped with their agony. Brooke emailed a photograph that night. Their backyard had patchy grass with a few white markers designating where a patio may have gone. She captioned it, "Still hoping to accomplish something before the weather turns." I did not respond. I simply stared at it. The space between us was no longer uneasy. It was expanding with purpose. For the first time in my life, I was finished making sure they were okay. And they were just beginning to understand what that meant. A week passed with nothing but stillness. There was no note from Mom, Dad, or Brooke. No nice nudges in the backyard. There have been no developments about rescheduling the trip. Just nothing. It might have seemed tranquil if I hadn't known them so well. They were not moving on. They were regrouping, waiting for me to leave, and making me believe I was the one who had walked away. Then a completely unexpected event occurred. I received an SMS from my cousin Rachel. "Hello, just checking in. Grandma is terribly upset about the Italy situation. You okay?" It completely stopped me. Grandma? She had not been mentioned once in the entire fiasco. She lives alone in Albany and has not traveled in over a decade. She sends handmade thank you cards and remembers everyone's birthdays. I always avoided family drama. I asked Rachel what Grandma was concerned about. She proceeded, "Brooke told her you canceled the trip out of nowhere and made them lose thousands. Grandma's confused and thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown." That's it. They were already altering the story. I was no longer the man who had to foot the tab and was excluded. I was now the erratic son who ruined a pleasant family getaway. Of course, they would distort it in that direction. They have always had control over the narrative up until now. I called Grandma. She responded right away. Voice is soft but heavy. "Nathan," she asked. "What happened, honey?" I told her everything. I didn't make it overly dramatic. I did not vent. I just lay everything out. How I was requested to pay months ago. How they prepared every aspect without involving me or my children. How I discovered out by accident. And so, when I brought it up, they said I had destroyed the trip simply by being there. She did not interrupt once. After a long pause, she stated, "That is not what they told me. They said you refused to go. You claimed you canceled the cards in a fit of wrath." I told her it wasn't even close. She was quiet again. Then she said, "I'm so sorry, Nathan. I don't know what's wrong with them." That was all I needed to know. But the consequences came swiftly. An hour later, I received a text message from my mother. "Did you tell Grandma a warped version of events? Then, Brooke, you're making matters worse. She is old, Nathan. She does not need this much stress." Tyler even joined in. "This is harmful behavior, man. You are turning people against their own families." I finished reading each one without feeling furious or sad. They had excluded me, lied about it, attempted to influence Grandma, and now have the audacity to accuse me of being divisive. So I responded with a final note, forwarded to the group chat with the four of them. "I'm ceasing to provide financial assistance effective. Immediately. No more vacations, renovations, loans, or we'll pay you back texts. If I'm too different to be a member of the family, I'm also too different to support it. Good luck with the backyard." I pressed send and put my phone down. Nobody replied that night. Not because they were surprised, but because they realized I meant it. About a week after I cut them off, Brooke called me out of nowhere. A full phone call, not just a text. I didn't respond. She left a voicemail with an almost humorous tone, bright and charming, as if we were catching up after a trip. She stated she had been thinking about what I said and that we should all get together soon. She even mentioned that the kids miss you. As if that were a magical phrase. A few days later, Mom texted me a photo of a stack of inexpensive patio stones thrown in their yard. "There are no workers, no development, only a mess." She wrote, "We're still going to try and make it work ourselves. Found a good deal locally." It was a shift. Subtle, careful. Just enough to imply how hard we're working without you. While still offering me a door to crawl through if I wanted to return. I said, "Looks promising. Let me know if you need help hauling." This opened the door just enough, and they walked right in. Mom texted a long essay about how every family goes through seasons and how she hoped I understood that money was not the reason we wanted you around. She explained that we had all gotten a little lost in the planning process, and that it might be time for a reset. Brooke contacted me separately. She said she had been feeling odd since the airport incident and wanted to reconnect. There is no pressure. She asked if we could get coffee next week just to discuss. No expectations. Even Tyler, who normally sent one-word replies or passive-aggressive emojis, texted, "I think I overreacted." We all did. No hard sentiments. It was an impressive shift, similar to a full-fledged rebranding campaign. Suddenly I wasn't toxic, unpredictable, or too unconventional. I was valuable again, useful. So I decided to give them a taste of their own medicine. I informed Brooke that I would love to meet. I selected a date and time. She responded with a heart emoji and even expressed an interest in purchasing. Then, the morning of, I canceled. Said something cryptic about a long work call. She was disappointed, but polite. I completely understand. Let us reschedule soon. We did not. A few days later, Mom asked if I could pitch in a little with gravel delivery. Just $300 will help offset the shortfall. I replied I'd check some things and get back to her. I did not. Dad indicated they were looking into firewood delivery for the winter. They said that the provider they used last year had hiked pricing. I asked him to provide me the URL. I said I would see what I could do. He did. I did not. And each time they followed up, I responded in the same tone they had used with me for years. Empty courtesy, courteous avoidance, and hazy curiosity with no commitment. It worked better than I expected. Brooke became silent first. I stopped responding to even the most basic text messages. Then Mom's communications became shorter, more spread apart, and then stopped entirely. Tyler unfollowed me on Instagram. When October arrived, Dad did not send out his regular happy birthday group text to the entire family. That one was strange. It has been going out like clockwork for 10 years. The funny aspect was that they couldn't say anything about it. I'd done nothing wrong. I had not yelled, cursed, or told them off. I'd just become them. They had always been this version of themselves to me. All promises, no payment. All surface, no substance. And I believe for the first time, they experienced what it was like to be outside of their own games. It must have been hellish. Thanksgiving arrived as it always does, creeping up while you're still certain it's only October. Something was different this year though. My phone remained quiet. Not a single group text from Mom. Brooke also did not provide a passive-aggressive reminder. Please RSVP this year, as she used to do. There will be no half-hearted invitation from Dad, which is generally inserted as a forwarded message, like an afterthought. It was the first occasion in my life that I wasn't invited. I did not say anything. I didn't ask. I didn't send a hello. What's the plan SMS merely to pretend that I wasn't expecting one. Instead, on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I saw it all unfold on social media. Brooke went full Pinterest this year. There was a large table set for 10, with many pumpkins as placeholders, handwritten name cards, and napkins folded into small fans. She captioned it, "Grateful for the real ones." Each chair was full. Each plate has a name. Mine was not one of them. Neither was Lily's nor Ethan's. It was deliberate. It was not about forgetting. It wasn't a miscommunication. They made a choice. No, Nathan. There was no reminder of what had changed. Just a carefully crafted version of family, the one who did not challenge them. They were never asked to feel sorry or responsibility. I did not tell Lily or Ethan anything. We prepared our own dinner. Not turkey. They voted for homemade mac and cheese and waffles. So that is what we did. We ate on the couch, watched old movies, and laughed so hard that I almost forgot what day it was. A few days later, I ran across Rachel again. The parking lot for the grocery shop. Same weird half smile. They did not invite you? She inquired, even though she already knew the answer. Nope, I said. First year. She nodded slowly. Brooke explained to Grandma that it was just easier this way. Less tension means less tension. That's how they put it, cutting me and my children out altogether. They could mute us just like background noise. As if their issue wasn't what they did to me, but how uncomfortable it felt them to look at it. Christmas came next, and I didn't even check my phone. The only snapshot I saw came from a neighbor who follows Brooke on Instagram. She displayed a family photo in front of the fireplace. Matching pajamas, 5 stockings, hot cocoa, as usual. I zoomed in out of curiosity. There were names on the stockings. None for my children. There was no Lily, Ethan or me, not even a just-in-case placeholder hanging at the end. The message could not have been clearer. They weren't simply excluding me. They were deleting us. It seems ridiculous at first. I would be lying if I said otherwise. But the discomfort did not last. It transformed into something colder and quieter. Not bitterness, but distance. I had no idea I could achieve such emotional quiet. By January, I had stopped checking their names in my alerts. I drove Lily and Ethan to Seattle for New Year's. It's just us. We walked around Pike Place Market in the rain, rode the Ferris wheel, purchased costly souvenirs, and stayed in a hotel with a fireplace and robes that made them chuckle. It was not traditional. It was not planned down to the second. It was real. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel as though I was missing anything. I did not feel left out. I felt free. Surprisingly, that was my most financially successful year. I landed 3 new clients. Finally completed a nightmarish project from the previous year, and had more money in my accounts than I'd ever had. I could have purchased Melanie's entire backyard times over. They could have paid for the trip again and upgraded every seat. Could have given them a blank check to show a point. Instead, I constructed a heated driveway in my home and began arranging a summer road vacation with my children. There's no need for group conversation. No approval is required. They stopped inviting me not because I had changed, but because I had ceased following their rules. I stopped making it easy for people to use and disregard me simultaneously. And once the money was gone, and I made it obvious that nothing else came with it, not silence, forgiveness, or a smile, they had no idea how to treat me again. So they didn't. They cut me out for their own comfort. And I stayed outside to keep my peace. 2 months have gone. It was February when I received the envelope. Plain, with no return address. Only my name written in my mother's unsteady handwriting, as if she wasn't sure whether to send it. I stood in the kitchen, staring at it for a while. I could have tossed it, but curiosity won. Inside was a folded note and a check. The letter contained only 2 paragraphs. The first stated that they were reaching out to repair what was left. The second stated that the check was for your half of the Italy vacation, as you did not attend. It went for $3,600. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because of the quantity, but because they still assumed it was about money. Like they could wrap a ribbon around that week, repay my missing experience, and pretend nothing occurred. As if writing me a check will make up for the way they abandoned me and my children. I did not cash it. I fastened it on the fridge with a magnet and left it there. Tyler sent me a message 3 days later. Only one sentence. We need to talk. I ignored it. Brooke then texted, Grandma's in the hospital. She asked for you. That one made me pause. I called the hospital and confirmed it was correct. She had a mild heart condition, nothing serious, but she had asked for me twice. So I drove up. When I walked in, she smiled like if I hadn't missed a beat. Like we hadn't missed 2 holidays and a dozen family gatherings. We talked for an hour, largely about books, weather, and miscellaneous topics. Then she continued. Don't let them write the ending without you. I wasn't sure what to answer. On the way home I stopped at a diner and sat in my car with a coffee, staring at the check once again in my thoughts. That night, Brooke called again. This time, I picked up. She rushed right in, saying they wanted to reset everything. Said it could be time for a real conversation. She did not apologize. Not precisely. However, she stated that the children inquired as to why they had not seen Lily and Ethan in such a long time. She suggested we get everyone together soon. Then comes the unexpected part. She mentioned that her mother and father were discussing selling the house. She stated that the proceeds from the sale might be put into a pooled account for family purposes. She called, and they hoped I might help construct something for the future. I did not even respond. I've just ended the call. The following morning, I mailed the check back. There's no note, just the check. That was the end. No fighting, no yelling, just silence. Nothing has happened since then. No texts, calls, or phony family brunches. It's as if they sensed I was done playing alone. There is no longer leverage or fallback. The group threads have stopped humming. Birthdays go unmentioned. Rachel told me that the house eventually sold. They purchased a modest property outside the city. Nobody invited me to see it. I don't believe they hate me. I believe I scared them because I was not bitter. I was not dramatic. I did not try to win. I've just departed. And I did not look back. My golden sister got pregnant at 13, and my parents forced me to wear a fake belly and pretend the baby was mine to protect the family's reputation. When my little sister got pregnant at 13, my parents didn't send her to the doctor. They handed me a fake belly and told me to lie to the world. That was the first time they asked me to give up my future. It wasn't the last. What followed was a tangle of silence, shame, and survival, and a choice no teenager should ever have to make. Protect the truth, or protect my sister. This is the story of how I became the mother of a child that was never mine, and the sister who refused to stay silent. The only thing dying here is your selfishness. Put on the belly. I did not argue, I simply gazed at her. That was nearly 2 years ago. Yesterday I received a thank you note from her high school graduation, signed with 2 names. What's the worst lie your family forced you to tell? When my 13-year-old sister Lily became pregnant, my parents made me wear a false belly and pretend the baby was mine. They said her future was more important than mine. My parents' entire identity revolved around becoming the perfect family. With two accomplished daughters preparing for Ivy League schools. Mom supervised the church youth group while Dad served as a deacon. They paraded my lovely sister Lily around at all congregation events. Lily returned home from church camp, crying and pregnant. I witnessed my parents' carefully crafted world disintegrate before they decided to build it on my back. They summoned me to Lily's chamber where she lay curled up, looking so young that my chest hurt. "You're 17, and you already dress like a whore," Mom murmured, stroking Lily's hair as the child sobbed. "But Lily's only 13 with her whole future ahead of her. You're going to wear this belly and tell everyone you're pregnant." She took off the foam padding, and I looked at my younger sister, remembering how I taught her to ride a bike, and felt rage clash with protectiveness. "She needs a doctor," I explained. "She's 13 and pregnant. She could die." Dad's face turned frigid. "The only thing dying here is your selfishness. Put on the belly." Lily muttered, "I'm sorry," but refused to meet my gaze. I tried reasoning first, suggesting we could say Lily was ill. I needed homeschooling while finishing my final year. Dad retaliated by destroying my laptop, which included my college essays and scholarship applications, and stated, "Teen moms don't need those." Next I visited my school counselor. However, before I began explaining, Mom had already called ahead. I claimed to be pregnant and was in denial. The counselor gave me pregnant vitamins and adoption materials. I submitted an anonymous tip to Child Services about a 13-year-old who was denied medical attention. However, Mom intercepted it and confined me in my room for 3 days. Until I agreed to quit causing issues. The padding became thicker as they modified it weekly to reflect Lily's actual progress. I snuck into Lily's room one night and discovered her crying, frightened of giving birth. "We could run away together," I said, clutching her. "Get you real help." But she simply sobbed more. "Mom says, if anyone finds out about what he did to me, they'll say I wanted it." The dad was a 23-year-old camp counselor who had groomed and raped my younger sister. And now our parents are holding both of us hostage, instead of bringing him to justice. I took images of Lily's actual belly while she slept. I intend to take them to the police. But Dad caught me. He didn't yell. Instead, he took me to the worst part of town at 2 a.m. and dropped me off. "Walk home," he told me. "Think about how much worse things can get for girls who don't listen." I spent 4 hours in the dark, afraid and alone, hugging my phony tummy like a teddy bear. After that night, I knew I needed to devise a better strategy. I phoned a cousin who had fled our family years earlier and begged for assistance. She volunteered to drive down and grab Lily and me during the birth, when our parents were distracted. For weeks I kept her updated and sent her money, so she could help me and Lily acquire an apartment. We assured Lily that we'd keep her baby together somewhere safe. When Lily went into labor, Dad drove while Mom coached her through contractions in the back seat. I sent my cousin the hospital's name. But when we arrived, my cousin was already there, seated with my parents' pastor. "Your mom called me last week," my cousin replied, not meeting my gaze. "She reminded me of my own follies at the age of 17. I believe you girls need your parents' advice." Betrayal felt like drowning. My parents smirked at me as they saw my last dream dashed. Lily delivered a healthy girl despite her age. And my parents made her sign paperwork placing her up for adoption, without even allowing Lily to hold her. Lily was too weak from blood loss to realize what was going on. Until it was too late. She sobbed the next morning when she discovered her baby had died forever. "I named her Hope," she explained, her body quivering. My parents compelled me to pretend that the baby I had reportedly delivered was stillborn, because they didn't want the adoption rumors. I wore black and accepted casseroles from the church ladies. Lily recovered alone, tucked away. The town treated me as broken glass, whispering about the adolescent woman who had lost her child as punishment for her transgressions. I went through the days like a ghost. Working in a grocery shop, where customers either avoided my gaze or stared in sympathy. Every night, I heard Lily wail through the walls. She was mourning for the daughter she would never be able to hold again. I began community college in January. Driving an hour each way allowed me to flee my family without leaving Lily. She returned to school too, thinner, while preserving her flawless grades. I bagged groceries until midnight to afford textbooks. We seldom spoke anymore since gazing at each other reminded us of hope. Then in March, Lily began vomiting at breakfast. Mom discovered the pregnancy test in her trash and summoned me home from work. The counselor had threatened her. He threatened to reveal the truth about her pregnancy unless she met with him. He then pressed himself on her again. "So you'll put the belly back on?" Dad remarked, as if we were talking about the weather. Tell everyone you're pregnant again. Stupid girls do it all the time. I stared at them. These folks would protect a predator. To preserve their reputation, and distorted image of Lily's unspoiled future. I refused. Mom replied, then we'll tell everyone you made Lily lie about being robbed because you were jealous. Whom will they believe? The godly parents, or the teen mother? I stared at my parents, these monsters who had sacrificed both of their daughters to safeguard their reputation. And something inside of me finally cracked. Not in bits, but in place, as if a lock clicked open. I strolled into the kitchen and grabbed Mom's phone from the counter. She rushed for it, but I held it up and scrolled through her contacts. Dad rushed toward me, but I backed up against the wall and found what I was looking for. Pastor William's phone number. I began typing a text as they yelled threats. Mom grabbed my wrist and twisted it till I dropped the phone. It broke over the tile floor. Dad hauled me to my room and forced me inside, then locked the door from the outside. I could hear Lily screaming through the walls, pleading with them to let me out. For 3 days, they kept me locked up and slipped food under the door. I took the time to plan. They thought breaking me down would force me to submit. But each hour alone only strengthened my determination. I scribbled notes on paper, planning out every individual who could aid and every possible escape route. When they eventually let me out, I was calmer than they had expected. I nodded as Mom handed me the foam belly. I strapped it on without arguing. Dad grinned, glad I'd learnt my lesson. They had no idea I was finished being their victim. At work that night, I cornered my manager, Kelly, in the break room. She had always been polite to me, offering me leftover soup when I appeared exhausted. I lifted my shirt up to see the false tummy, then removed it completely. Her eyes widened as I hurriedly described everything in whispers. Kelly drove me home after my shift, but when we got, Mom stood on the porch alongside 2 church elders. They had also anticipated this action. Kelly glanced at us all, puzzled and overwhelmed. The elders spoke quietly about problematic teenagers and disobedience. Mom sobbed right on cue. Kelly left without me, casting concerned glances over her shoulder. The next morning, my mother forced me wear the belly to church. I sat through the entire service, feeling the weight of every glare and muttered prayer for the poor girl who couldn't stop sinning. Lily sat 3 rows ahead, shoulders slumped and seeming smaller than ever. Lily was throwing up again after church, so I found her in the bathroom. This time, it was from pure anxiousness rather than morning sickness. I pushed her hair back, and we didn't talk because we didn't need to. Her eyes were filled with the same desperation as mine. That week I attempted everything. I called the school counselor from a payphone. But she stated she was already aware of my second pregnancy and gave more adoption leaflets. I walked to the police station during my lunch break. But the cop at the desk was Dad's golf partner. He called Dad before I could submit a report. Each failed attempt teaches me something. My parents had spent years growing their network and reputation. Everyone saw them as pillars in the community. But the same network contained flaws, people they'd hurt or disregarded. I recall Mrs. Green from down the street, whose daughter abruptly departed for boarding school last year. I knocked on her door one evening, while my folks assumed I was at work. She welcomed me in without asking, poured tea, and listened. When I finished, she sat silently for a long time. Mrs. Green explained that she couldn't help immediately. Her own family's secrets kept her confined, but she told me about her nephew Alex, a social worker from the next county. She wrote his number on a napkin and placed it in my hand. Sometimes, she explained cautiously, help comes from unexpected places. I hid the number in my shoe and returned home. Dad searched my pockets, phone and room, but never my shoes. Small triumphs were important when you had nothing else. At school I began documenting everything. Not obviously, but in ways that resembled regular homework. English essays about family dynamics. Health class projects on teen pregnancy. Each assignment featured carefully phrased truths that may someday be relevant. Lily's condition deteriorated day after day. The counselor had threatened her again and demanded another meeting. What exactly is happening with this counselor that the parents refuse to report? They're going to all this trouble with false bellies and lies, but they're allowing this man to continue harming Lily. She avoided to eat for fear of gaining weight and showing. Mom shoved nutrition shakes down her throat while Dad supported her arms. I watched from the doorway, remembering their wickedness, so that one day I could make them pay. One night, I sneaked into Lily's room and found her writing what appeared to be goodbye letters. I snatched them, read the first paragraph, and my blood ran cold. She intended to hurt herself rather than go through this again. I held her while she wailed, vowing that we'd find a way out. I simply needed more time. The next day, during my break at the grocery store, I called Alex. His tone was professional yet compassionate. I explained everything in about 5 minutes. I knew my manager would notice if I took too long. Alex listened, asked thoughtful questions, and then stated that he would require verification. Real evidence. Not just words. I began snapping photographs with a disposable camera that I purchased using tip money. Lily has an expanding belly, the adoption paperwork they had forced her to sign, which I discovered on Mom's desk. They made me wear a false belly. Each photograph posed a risk while also serving as ammunition. Dad must have felt things shifting, because he began driving me to and from work, denying me freedom of movement. Mom started sitting in my room when I was doing schoolwork. She was reading her Bible and watched me with chilly eyes. They tightened the net. However, they were unaware that I had already begun cutting holes in it. I kept Alex's phone number buried in my shoe for a week, waiting for the ideal opportunity. Mom's observation became more intense. She set up a baby monitor in my room. She claimed she wanted to ensure I wasn't damaging the baby. The irony seared when I strapped on the artificial tummy every morning. Lily's actual one became covered beneath baggy sweatshirts. The disposable camera became my lifeline. I photographed everything I could reach. Bank statements show huge financial withdrawals around the time of Hope's adoption. The camp counselor's photograph from the church bulletin board. Mom kept medical invoices addressed to Lily in her desk drawer, believing she had hidden them well enough. Each click of the shutter seemed like I was loading ammunition into a pistol that would eventually be fired. Work became my only escape, but even that freedom dwindled. Dad began turning up at various times throughout my shifts, wandering the aisles while keeping me in sight. My coworkers noticed his presence and whispered about the overprotective father of a pregnant girl. I smiled and played the act as wrath simmered beneath a layer of foam cushioning. One evening, Mrs. Dubwa from church walked through my checkout line. Her own daughter left town abruptly 2 years ago. She scrutinized my false belly with knowing eyes before slipping a folded note between the items. I hastily pocketed it. Later, in the restroom, I read her message. I understand what they are doing. Call me when you are ready. I remembered her phone number and flushed the paper. Another ally, another weakness in my parents' flawless facade. But I needed more than pity. I wanted evidence that they couldn't reject or explain away. Lily's condition deteriorated daily. She passed out during supper one night, striking her head on the table edge. Blood dripped from the wound as Mom wiped it with a dishcloth, believing she only needed rest. I attempted to call an ambulance, but Dad ripped the phone from the wall. They dragged Lily to her room and locked us both in. I treated her wound with tissues and water from the bathroom faucet, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Her skin felt feverish, and her breathing was shallow. The camp counselor had done more than simply assault her again. He had broken something inside her that our parents refused to acknowledge. Mom unlocked the door the next morning, smiling as she did in church. She gave me prenatal vitamins and reminded me of my doctor's visit that afternoon. The appointment where I'd have to persuade a doctor that my foam belly contained a genuine baby. The concept made me ill. At the clinic, I sat in the waiting room, surrounded by expectant women. Mom talked to them about morning sickness and baby names as I sweated beneath the cushion. When the nurse called my name, my mother stood to follow. The nurse shook her head and cited privacy policies. Mom's jaw tensed, but she settled back down. In the exam room, I removed the fake tummy and showed the nurse my flat stomach. She looked confused as I blurted out the truth. Her expression changed from astonishment to fear. She offered to help and call someone to fix it. But when we got out, Mom had already spoken with the doctor. They talked about my psychological concerns and pregnancy denial. The nurse stood motionless, outmaneuvered by my mother's planning. The ride home was silent. Mom won another round, but I noticed something in the nurse's eyes. Not everyone bought their falsehoods. The fractures were expanding. That night I heard Lily weep again. Instead of her normal calm tears, she made harsh, painful sounds. I picked a lock with a hairpin I'd been practicing with and discovered her curled up on the floor. Blood was coating her pajama bottoms. This time, I did not hesitate. I dashed to the kitchen and retrieved Dad's car keys from the hanger. Mom entered in the doorway as I helped Lily stand up. Dad appeared from their bedroom and blocked our path to the front door. They demanded that I return Lily to her room and that they tackle the situation in the morning. I saw my sister's gray face, felt her weight against me, and made my decision. I drove Dad's shoulder into the wall before pushing past him. Mom grabbed Lily's other arm and attempted to pull her back. Lily screamed, a sound that should have devastated any mother's heart. Instead, Mom pulled harder. I pushed her aside and half-carried Lily to the car. Dad caught up as I fumbled with my keys. He grabbed my wrists and twisted till I dropped them. Lily collapsed against the car door, taking shallow breaths. In that moment, watching my father chose his reputation over his daughter's life. Something cold and crystalline solidified within me. I kneed him in the groin. He doubled over and gasped. I grabbed the keys and shoved Lily into the passenger seat. Mom dashed toward us, but I had already started the engine. We pulled out of the driveway, leaving them standing in the headlights. The hospital's emergency room was bright and crowded. I carried Lily inside, yelling for assistance. Nurses approached us and took her away on a gurney. I attempted to follow, but security stopped me. I wasn't family, they said. The irony would have been amusing if Lily hadn't died. I called Alex from the hospital's payphone. This time I did not whisper or haste. I told him everything while monitoring the emergency room doors. He promised to arrive right away and that this would alter everything. I gave him the hospital's name and slumped into a waiting room chair. Mom and Dad came 20 minutes later. They spoke to the receptionist in calm tones, expertly portraying the anxious parents. When they approached, Mom's hand tightened around my arm like a vice. They tried to compel me to leave, to return home so we could discuss this as a family. When I started yelling, security interfered. Not words, just music. Pure wrath and dread erupted from my throat. They separated us and made my parents sit on the opposite side of the waiting area. Dad's eyes threatened vengeance. Mom grabbed her handbag, undoubtedly contemplating her next move. Alex came before they could attempt again. He had an official badge and spoke with quiet authority. My parents' faces became pale when he introduced himself. He came a colleague, a woman who specialized in cases like ours. They separated us for interviews. I handed over the disposable camera and showed them the photographs on my phone. I recited dates and occurrences that I had memorized. The woman took notes without judgment, asking probing questions that revealed things I had not known were important. Meanwhile, Alex spoke with my parents, his soothing voice resonating around the waiting room. After almost 2 hours, a doctor emerged. Lily was stable but required surgery. The pregnancy had been ectopic, which means it was growing in the wrong spot. She would have died if she had not received timely medical treatment. The doctor's remarks lingered in the air like an accusation. Mom attempted to twist things, claiming they were ready to bring Lily in herself. The doctor's reaction suggested she had heard similar lies before. She posed pointed questions about prenatal care, explains how a 13-year-old's pregnancy proceeded so far without medical intervention. Dad's responses became increasingly fumbling. Alex's coworker grabbed me aside. Lily would need to be placed in protective custody while the investigation was ongoing. She inquired if I had a safe place to stay. I remembered Mrs. Dubb's knowing gaze and Mrs. Green's modest tea ceremony. I had options now. The surgery took 3 more hours. I napped in the uncomfortable chair, jolting awake as footsteps approached. My parents were led to a different waiting area after Dad attempted to corner me in the lavatory. Their kingdom was disintegrating, brick by brick. When Lily awoke, I was present. Her eyes focused slowly, perplexed by the hospital environment. I held her hand and explained what had happened, while tears streamed down her cheeks. The baby was gone. The counselor's second onslaught almost killed her. But she was still alive, which was sufficient for the time being. Alex returned with documents and emergency custody orders. Investigations for medical neglect necessitated reporting on the counselor. The legal machinery began to move, slowly but inexorably. My parents couldn't stop it with phone calls and tears. They tried, of course. Mom called her church friends and told them stories about wayward daughters and social workers who went too far. But Mrs. Ellison had also been busy. She had spoken with other mothers whose daughters had also departed unexpectedly. The pattern was getting clearer. Dad tried a different way. He showed up at my workplace with my possessions, playing the sad father, who simply wanted his daughter home. The phony belly meeting the real medical team is hilarious until you realize there is a dying child involved. Nothing like convincing a nurse that your foam padding need prenatal care as your sister bleeds out at home. Kelly, my boss, stood beside me while I refused. He left the boxes beside the entrance, but not before placing an envelope in my palm. Inside came a $5,000 payment and a note asking for your silence. I photocopied both and handed the originals to Alex. More evidence equals more nails in their coffin. The probe widened, delving into nooks my parents had assumed were safe. The church board began asking questions. The young group's parents wanted answers. Lily spent a week in the hospital. I divided my time between her room and work, sleeping on waiting room chairs and showering in the employee restroom. My fictitious pregnancy turned into actual weariness. Dark circles have replaced foam padding. But for the first time in months, I was able to breathe. The camp counselor was arrested on Tuesday. I wasn't present, but Mrs. Ellison called to inform me. He'd been working at a church camp 2 counties over. They discovered evidence of further victims. My stomach churned as I thought of the other Lilies suffering in solitude. Mom attempted one final manipulation. She arrived at the hospital holding Lily's favorite stuffed animal, tears running down her cheeks. She implored Lily to return home, promising that things would be different. Lily gazed at me, then the teddy bear, and finally at our mother. She took the bear and requested Mom to leave. Alex identified a foster family that specialized in circumstances like ours. Mrs. Cato was a nurse before becoming a foster parent. Her abode smelled of green tea and safety. Lily finally received the pink room she had always wanted. I installed a lock on my door that only I could control. We testified in separate rooms, Lily using a video link because seeing him made her puke. I sat in the witness chair and spoke every truth they had attempted to conceal. The prosecutor had images from my disposable camera blown up as evidence. Mom faked medical records. Dad sends threatening SMS. I kept the artificial tummy as evidence. Our parents sat in the gallery, shrinking with every revelation. Their church buddies filled the remaining seats, but support had shifted. Mrs. Ellison sat behind us. Mrs. Burt sent flowers. Even Kelly arrived on her day off in her nicest clothes. The counselor received 15 years. Not enough, but something. He would be sentenced to at least 10 years before becoming eligible for parole. Other charges brought by other victims would put him in custody for longer periods of time. Lily cried when they read the decision. This time the tears were good. The lawsuit against our parents proceeded slowly. Child endangerment, medical neglect and conspiracy allegations prompted Dad to engage an expensive lawyer. Their savings dwindled as their reputation deteriorated. The church quietly removed them from their leadership roles. Mom's youth group has disbanded. I began college that September, a year late, but determined. The scholarship I believed I'd lost was held by a sympathetic administrator who had heard about my situation. Lily entered therapy. Instead of prayer circles, seek real help. She painted Hope's name on a painting and displayed it in her new pink room. We occasionally saw our parents in the grocery store. They had aged years and months. Their beautiful facade had crumbled beyond repair. Mom once tried to reach us, but the restraining order stopped her after 50 feet. Dad only gazed, possibly realizing what he had lost. Mrs. Cato guided us through the legal system. Emancipation for me came at the age of 18. Lily is under permanent guardianship. Victim compensation provides monies for therapy and education. We gradually rebuilt what they had attempted to demolish. The town's whispers had altered, no longer about the teen mother who'd lost her baby. But what about the girl who had saved her sister? About parents who prioritized image over children? About secrets that couldn't stay hidden forever? The reality, however ugly and terrible, proved to be stronger than their polished lies. Lily started high school in a new district. No one knew our tale unless she decided to tell it. She joined the art group and met people who saw her as more than a victim. On Hope's birthday, we released balloons in the park and watched them disappear into the clouds. I worked less hours and focused on pre-medical courses. Helping Lily through her medical crisis has given me the way forward. Kelly drafted recommendation letters that emphasized her strength under duress. Alex stopped in on a monthly basis, happy of our development. The investigation revealed more than we knew. Financial fraud associated to adoption. Fraudulent paperwork at the church, a pattern of covering for the counselor that went back years. Our parents had charges that proliferated like cancer cells, eating away at their manufactured lives. Lily continued to cry for hope on certain nights. I hugged her through her grief. Recognized that some wounds never completely heal. She smiled more too. Painted bright canvases. They spoke about becoming art therapists. She wanted to support other girls who had been silenced. Mom sent letters that we didn't open. Dad tried contacting lawyers, relatives, and religious friends. Each effort resulted in the same response: silence. We had given them years of our voices. Now they have nothing. The final custody hearing loomed like a storm. Our parents' lawyer would advocate for reunification. Alex advised us to be prepared for emotional manipulation and promises of change. But Lily and I had learned to handle storms. We acquired evidence of our new life. Lily has improved her grades. My college admission, photos of birthday celebrations and ordinary teenage times, testimonials from instructors and counselors who had witnessed our recovery. Proof that we could have prospered even without them. The hearing was planned on Thursday. We'd face them one final time. Speak our truths to a judge who will determine our future. But, whatever happened, we had already won an important battle. We had survived. We'd safeguarded one another. We had refused to live their lives. Lily painted large, colorful strokes that created wings on Wednesday night. Bird wings, not angel wings, are strong enough to fly away. She signed it with her and Hope's names interwoven. Like sisters who'd never meet. However, they would always be connected. I packed our documents, photos, and proof of everything we'd accomplished. Tomorrow could bring either freedom or another fight. But tonight we had takeaway and watched movies. Two sisters who had taught that family means prioritizing each other above all else. The morning would arrive soon enough. For now we had this truth. Survival. And the certainty that we had already dealt with the worst they could do. The rest was simply paperwork. Thursday morning brought gray skies, which suited my attitude. I dressed carefully, picking clothes that made me appear responsible without trying too hard. Lily wore the blue dress that Mrs. Cato had purchased her for special occasions. We ate breakfast in quiet, sliding eggs around on our plates. Mrs. Yamamoto drove us to the courthouse. Her steady presence calmed my racing heart. Alex met us in the parking lot with a colleague and a large packet of documentation. He went over our testimony one last time, encouraging us to adhere to the facts and avoid emotional outbursts. The courtroom was smaller than I had anticipated. Wood paneling and artificial lighting made everything appear washed out. Our parents sat at a table with their lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who was constantly checking his phone. Mom donned her church dress, the one with the little flowers that made her appear innocent. Dad shaved and donned his deacon tie. The judge entered, and we all stood. She was younger than I thought, with gentle eyes that scanned the room carefully. Alex had stated that she specialized in family cases and had seen scenarios similar to ours previously. I wish it was real. Our parents' lawyer spoke first, portraying a picture of an exaggerated misunderstanding. He discussed loving parents who made mistakes under stress. Regarding adolescent rebellion and outside influences, discusses the value of keeping families together. Every syllable felt like sandpaper against my skin. When Alex rose to deliver our case, he began with the photographs. The artificial belly, medical records indicating Lily's age during both pregnancies. The adoption papers were signed under duress. Bank statements and text messages. The evidence stood like a barrier between us and our parents. I testified first, keeping my voice steady as I described each occurrence. The lawyer attempted to twist my statements, implying that I had been jealous of Lily. I had exaggerated for attention. I adhered to facts, detailing the night Dad abandoned me in the scary neighborhood. The locked doors and forced padding. Lily testified over a video hookup from another room. Her voice shook as she spoke about the camp counselor, the threats, and the second pregnancy. She had to pause twice to collect herself. The judge's expression hardened with each detail. During recess I noticed Mom in the bathroom. She stood by the sink, grasping the edge as if it could hold her upright. Her reflection seems hollow and old. She noticed me in the mirror but said nothing. We remained silent for a time before I departed. The afternoon featured character witnesses. Mrs. Ellison described her suspicions and the trend she had observed. Kelly commented on my work ethic despite everything. Lily's new school teachers met to discuss her progress. Each testimonial added another brick to our foundation. Our parents' witnesses were scant. Church members who spoke in broad terms about their good character. People who had known them for years but had never seen inside our house. Compared to the evidence, their remarks rang hollow. The judge called a last recess before making her verdict. We waited in a small room that smelled of stale coffee and tension. Lily sketched patterns on a legal pad while I paced. Alex sat peacefully, having done everything he could. When we returned, the judge spoke for 20 minutes. She outlined the facts, testimony, and legal requirements. She discussed the best interests of children. Concerning patterns of abuse and control. About parents that prioritized reputation over their daughter's well-being. The decision was thorough. Alex's storing evidence of a $5,000 bribe makes me wonder why these parents think money can solve everything. While there is already an investigation underway, the counselor's arrest at another church camp implies someone knew and simply shifted him about rather than stopping him. Mrs. Cato has permanent responsibility of me until I turn 18. Then to me for Lily. Supervised visitation is only permitted if we choose to grant it. All parties must continue with their therapy. The restraining order would remain in effect. Our parents' lawyer immediately mentioned an appeal. The court cut him off, saying the evidence was overwhelming. She looked directly at our parents and stated that the court had shown more kindness than they had showed their girls. Mom burst into tears. Not her polished ones, but raw, ugly sobbing. Dad wrapped his arm over her, but his expression remained blank. They seemed smaller somehow. It was as if all of their might had vanished under the courtroom lights. We took a separate exit to avoid them. Lily stretched for my hand inside the car. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to suggest that our interlaced fingers were not already communicating. That evening, Mrs. Cato prepared a special dinner. It wasn't fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread. But it felt like a feast. We ate on the back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky with colors of promise. Lily showed me a new painting that she had been working on. 2 birds on a wire, leaning against each other in the wind. She had utilized every color in her palette, making something beautiful out of chaos. I identified ourselves in those birds. The following few days were a jumble of normalcy that felt strange. There are no locked doors, phony bellies, or threats. Just normal daily activities like homework, chores, and bickering about TV shows. Lily chuckled at something ridiculous on her phone, which made me cry. I returned to work and Kelly had adorned my register with a small placard that stated, "Welcome back." Customers regarded me just like any other cashier, not realizing the girl processing their goods had just won the struggle of her life. Alex called to check in, reminding us of various options, support groups that we may join when ready, legal assistance if our parents disobeyed the order, numbers to call in case we needed anything. We filed it away, believing we'd never need it. One afternoon, I found Lily in her room, clutching the teddy bear her mother had brought to the hospital. She wasn't crying. She was simply staring at it, as if it held answers. I sat next to her and we chatted about complicated emotions. About loving people who have wronged us. About moving forward without forgetting. School once again became my haven. My lecturers had no idea about my experience. All they saw was a student eager to learn. I pushed myself into pre-med studies with a newfound purpose. Every anatomy lesson reminded me of Lily in her hospital bed, which strengthened my resolve. Lily participated in the school play, surprise everyone, even herself. She played a little role but put herself into rehearsals. Mrs. Cato and I sat in the crowd on opening night, cheering too loudly as she delivered her 3 lines flawlessly. We created new traditions. Instead of going to church on Sunday morning, we had pancakes. Movie nights where we chose flicks that our parents would have forbidden. Small rebellions seemed like we were reclaiming ourselves. The grocery shop where I worked hired 2 additional employees, allowing me to work fewer hours and focus more on education. I trained them meticulously, recalling how work had been my only escape. You never knew who would need the employment as a lifeline. Lily's therapy sessions began to progress. She came home lighter some days, as if she had sat down with invisible weights. She began talking about the future again, about art school options, and about becoming someone who could help youngsters like her. We received a letter from the lawyer who was conducting the criminal case against the camp counselor. More victims had stepped forward. His sentence is likely to be increased. Lily read it once and then requested me to file it away. She'd had enough of him occupying her thoughts. Mrs. Cato showed us how to cook her grandmother's meals. We spent the evenings in the kitchen chopping vegetables and talking about her childhood in Japan. She shared her personal experience of fleeing a terrible familial circumstance, demonstrating that surviving can lead to joy. I began volunteering at the hospital on weekends, shadowing nurses and physicians. Someone remembered me from Lily's emergency visit. She murmured, "Nothing but," and squeezed my shoulder, understanding. The medical community was full of folks who had witnessed the worst and still decided to help. Lily's grades improved significantly from before everything happened. Her art teacher recommended that she attend a summer program at the local college. She applied without telling me, hoping to surprise me with an acceptance letter. We occasionally ran into kids from our old church. Some ignored us, while others posed thoughtful questions. A few stated that they thought something was wrong but didn't know what to do. We didn't blame them, speaking up was harder than remaining silent. The restraining order allowed us to shop without worry and move about town without glancing over our shoulders. Freedom seemed weird at first, like wearing new shoes that had not yet been broken in. But with each passing day, it becomes more comfortable. Lily created Hope's portrait from memory for her first birthday. We framed it and displayed it in her room as a reminder that love can endure even after loss. Some nights I could still hear her crying, but now I could go to her and cuddle her, reminding her that she wasn't alone. My college advisor assisted me in applying for further scholarships. My article about overcoming difficulties earned me a small grant that covered textbooks for a year. I wrote about resilience without giving any specifics, safeguarding our privacy while sharing our strength. Alex provided updates on our parents' legal difficulties. Multiple charges were pending. Their counsel continued to file motions, which judges repeatedly denied. Their wealth dropped as their reputation deteriorated more. Natural consequences are playing out just as they should. We decided to get a cat, which our parents had always banned. Lily chose an orange tabby at the shelter that purred like a motorboat. Sunny was her name, and he stayed on her bed every night, providing a warm presence to alleviate nightmares. Spring has arrived, bringing with it new possibilities. I was accepted to the pre-med program at the State University. Lily's artwork was selected for a student exhibition. Mrs. Cato's garden blossomed with the veggies we planted together. Life developed in places where there had previously only been agony. Lily hugged me in the kitchen one random Tuesday for no apparent reason. We stood there, two sisters who had survived the worst, hugging each other in the safety we had fought so hard for. No words are required, just the rhythm of breathing in unison, hearts throbbing with hard-earned tranquility. The future lay ahead, unclear, but ours to shape. We'd create it day by day, choice by choice, away from the lies that had previously defined us. Together, we discovered that family was more than blood or responsibility. It was about repeatedly choosing each other, even when the world sought to separate you. My mother kept trying to win my little sister's love until an accident she caused left my sister unable to walk forever. It started with a photo. My mom made my little sister write, "I love mommy more," across my dad's face. He beamed as his face sank. When I urged her to quit fighting for Sophie's affection, she rolled her eyes and claimed she had already chosen her favorite. "I'm just making sure she doesn't forget." I remained mute. That was 5 months ago. This morning she was dragging her fingernails along our garden fence, screaming Sophie's name as blood flowed from her hands. When my 7-year-old sister said she loved her father more, Mom was preparing dinner when Sophie rushed up to her and grabbed her skirt. Mommy, come, Daddy's wearing my Elsa costume, he looks so funny." Mom laughed, but said she was too busy to go look. And Sophie humorously responded, "Ooh, I'm Mommy, I cook, I'm too bored to have fun." She then giggled. "That's why I love Daddy more." She dashed back to play. Mom shrugged it off, but I could tell from her eyes that the comment pained her. Mom helped erect the fort the next day after dinner. She crawled through the blanket tunnels with Sophie. They even made silly voices for the plush animals. When Sophie requested for ice cream after dinner, Mom immediately said yes. Dad raised an eyebrow, but Mom simply winked at him. Then continued to make Sophie giggle by putting ice cream on Dad's nose and licking it off. A few days later, I saw Mom and Sophie roll down the slope in our backyard. Mom's pricey birthday sundress was completely ruined by grass stains and muck. Dad looked frightened, but Mom simply shrugged. Memories matter more than dresses. We all thought it was very cute. Until then, Mom's behaviors had become more than just entertaining. Dad returned home from work with a new puzzle for him and Sophie to complete. When Mom saw it, she quickly stated that she and Sophie were going to have ice cream. "Just us girls tonight." Dad's face dropped, but he did not dispute. Worse, it became a pattern. Every night Mom would plan a unique activity for herself and Sophie that excluded Dad entirely. I recall one particular Saturday during family drawing time the next day. Mom repeatedly whispered to Sophie. I watched her push Sophie to depict Dad with a pout and write, "I love Mommy more," at the top. When Dad viewed the photo, his shoulders dropped. Mom immediately smiled as if she had won something. A few days later, Mom grabbed finger paint and began painting straight on our living room walls with Sophie. When Dad tried to stop them, Mom grabbed Sophie's hand and they fled outside, chuckling. Dad and I spent 3 hours cleaning the walls clean. 2 days later, I was searching for Christmas decorations in the attic. I caught Mom lifting Sophie through the gap and onto the roof. The roof lacked safety railings and sloped sharply. I screamed for her to stop and she rolled her eyes. "We're just having fun. You're as boring as your father." The car incident occurred on a Tuesday. Dad and I left Sophie and Mom in the van while we went to the shop for munchies. But when we got out, what we saw made our mouths drop. Sophie was driving Mom's SUV. Mom was in the passenger seat urging, "Press harder on the pedal, sweetie." Sophie pressed too hard and smashed into a parked car. The owner rushed out a few minutes later. Dad accepted responsibility right away and handed over his insurance information, as well as $500 in cash. Mom was praising Sophie how fantastic she did. That night I went to check on Sophie. She was cuddled up on her princess bed, and when I sat down, she whispered, "Mommy is starting to scare me." Dad and I staged an intervention the following morning. We took Mom down and discussed how she frightened Sophie with her unsafe behavior. Mom's face turned red. You're ganging up on the fun parent. Sophie loves me more now. She said so. We tried to reason with her, but she stormed away. The next day, Dad realized that Mom had emptied their entire savings account. $4,000 gone. He found the receipt. She had purchased a large commercial-grade bouncy castle for her lawn. Sophie will love this, she remarked when confronted. A few days later, I returned home from school to discover Sophie in the backyard, carrying Dad's axe. She had blood trickling down her leg from a gash. Mom stood nearby, clapping. Come on, sweetie. This is fun. Don't mind the cut. Tough girls don't cry. Sophie looked like she was about to sob. I took the axe and Dad carried Sophie inside to bandage her leg. Mom followed us, shouting at us for wrecking everything. That night we got down with Mom and informed her quite bluntly. Either she stops or Dad and I leave. She scoffed at first, but as she understood we were serious, she agreed to back down. Well, that lasted 2 days. That was when we received a direct call from Mom. She was sobbing so hard we couldn't understand her. I messed up. I messed up real bad. Come to the hospital now. We exceeded every speed limit on our way to the ER and discovered Mom in the waiting room. Her clothing were wet, and she was shaking. She explained what happened with uncontrollable sobbing. She had taken Sophie to the old quarry for some swimming fun. She encouraged Sophie to jump into the ocean from higher and higher rocks. She told us Sophie was afraid after jumping from 20 feet and injuring her ankle. She told her mother that she did not want to jump anymore. Mom cried, stating she had a dreadful gut feeling and should have stopped. But she really wanted to be a fun mom. She virtually coerced Sophie into jumping from the 30-foot cliff. The rock was salty and slippery. Sophie misplaced her leg while making the leap. She hit the shallow water incorrectly. Mom stated that there was a massive crack, and Sophie was not waking up. She was alive when she carried her inside. However, doctors refused to make any promises. We waited at the ER for 12 hours. When the doctor finally appeared, they broke the news. Sophie's spinal cord was almost completely severed at L2. She might never walk again. It was the first time I'd ever seen Dad cry. They let us see Sophie briefly after another hour. She was medicated but conscious. When she noticed us, her gaze turned to Mom. You scare me, Mommy. Get away from me. The hospital security guard approached us and requested Mom to go outside. She began to resist, but Dad grabbed her arm firmly and led her down the hallway. I remained with Sophie, clutching her small hand as equipment beeped around us. Her gaze kept darting to the door, ensuring that Mom would not return. Through the window, I saw Dad's expression shift from one of grief to one of anger. His mouth clenched as Mom gestured madly, apparently attempting to explain herself. She kept pointing back to Sophie's room. However, every time she tried to return, Dad blocked her route. The doctor returned with a clipboard and began detailing Sophie's condition to me. I was the only family member present. He gave me x-rays on a tablet, indicating the injured vertebrae. The words partial paralysis and significant rehabilitation slipped by me. All I could see was Sophie's little figure in that big hospital bed. Dad returned alone 20 minutes later. His eyes were crimson, but his face was determined. He kissed Sophie's forehead and said something I couldn't understand. Then he turned to me and beckoned for us to enter the hallway. Outside Sophie's room, Dad took out his phone and began making calls. First, he called his mother, my grandma, and asked her to come right away. Then he contacted his brother, a contractor who lived 2 hours away. Every talk was brief and urgent. Between calls he kept looking back to Sophie's room. Mom arrived at the end of the hall, attempting to approach again. I heard raised words as a nurse intercepted her. Dad did not even look up from his phone. He was scrolling through something, and his face became darker with each swipe. Later that evening, Grandma arrived carrying an overnight bag. She hugged us both tightly and headed straight to Sophie's bedside. Sophie's features softened somewhat as she spotted her. Grandma had always been her safe haven, reading her goodnight stories and baking her favorite cookies. Dad called me away while Grandma was sitting with Sophie. He showed me his phone's screen. Mom had previously written about the horrific tragedy on social media, using crying emojis and requesting prayers. The responses were filled with sympathy and support. Nobody knew exactly what had transpired. Sophie awoke the next morning feeling more aware. Physical therapists arrived to evaluate her. They moved her legs lightly to test for sensation. Sophie winced, but felt nothing below her knees. The therapist took notes on her record as she explained the long path ahead. Mom attempted to visit again during the shift change. She had brought a large teddy bear and balloons. The staff had evidently been told not to let her in without Dad's approval. She left the gifts at the nurse's station, and I noticed her crying in the elevator as the doors closed. Dad's brother Lucas came that afternoon. The two men crowded in the corner of the waiting room, conversing quietly. Lucas continued to shake his head and run his hands through his hair. I overheard parts of their chat about emergency custody and papers. Sophie underwent her first operation 2 days later to fix her spine. We waited in the surgery waiting room. Dad paced back and forth while Grandma knitted to keep her hands occupied. Mom arrived midway through, but hospital security led her to a separate waiting room after Dad spoke with them. The procedure went smoothly, but the surgeon's update was grim. Sophie would need several months of physical rehabilitation. She might recover some function, but walking normally seemed improbable. Dad's fist tightened so firmly that his knuckles became white. Dad made more phone calls that night when Sophie was sleeping. This time he contacted his bank, insurance company and work regarding family medical leave. He was building something, prepping for something, but I wasn't sure what. Mom sent me dozens of text messages, images of Sophie as a baby, videos of them playing together, and lengthy essays about how sorry she was. I did not respond. Every time my phone buzzed, I remembered Sophie's horrified expression as she asked her mother to leave. On the 4th day, the social worker paid a visit. She interviewed each of us separately, asking detailed questions about Sophie's home life and the circumstances that led up to her injuries. The pattern here demonstrates how Mom's demand for recognition absolutely outweighs her parenting judgment. Consider how she frames every interaction as a competition with Dad, rather than focusing on Sophie's genuine needs or safety. Dad had prepared a packet with printed screenshots of Mom's social media posts, bank statements indicating depleted savings, and images of Sophie with the axe wound. Sophie began physical therapy while still in the hospital. The therapist assisted her with simple exercises aimed at maintaining muscular tone in her paralyzed legs. Sophie tried so hard, her face wrinkled in concentration, but her legs wouldn't follow her directions. Mom snuck in during a shift change. I discovered her standing over Sophie's bed, stroking her hair and muttering apologies. Sophie's monitor began beeping faster and her heart rate spiked. She forced her eyes tight, pretending to sleep. I punched the call button and informed the nurse that Mom was not meant to be there. Mom turned against me, her face twisted with rage. She accused me of poisoning Sophie against her, siding with Dad, and destroying their particular link. Security arrived before she could say anything else. Dad moved quickly after that. He met with a family lawyer advised by Lucas and gathered all of the data we'd gathered, including images of the finger paint on the walls, the bill for the bouncy castle, medical papers from Sophie's axe wound, and witness statements from neighbors who had seen Mom put Sophie on the roof. The house felt empty without Sophie's laughter. Dad and I took turns staying at the hospital, ensuring that someone was constantly with her. We packed her favorite books, teddy animals, and anything else that might help make the sterile room feel more like home. Mom's behavior worsened. She showed up at my school, hoping to persuade me to speak with Dad on her behalf. She contacted Dad's workplace repeatedly until his boss intervened. She even called Sophie's teacher, telling him stories about how her father was keeping her away from her daughter. One evening when Dad was meeting with the lawyer, I sat with Sophie and ate dinner. She could only take a few bites of hospital food. She asked me quietly if she would ever walk again. I did not know how to respond. Grandma moved in briefly to assist. She cooked meals, cleaned laundry, and ensured that I arrived at school on time. She also served as a guard at the hospital, turning away Mom when she attempted to visit during Dad's shifts. The medical expenses began arriving. Even with insurance, the expenses were enormous. Dad spent several hours on the phone with billing departments, insurance companies, and the hospital's financial aid office. The stress was evident in the fresh creases on his face. Sophie experienced both good and bad days. Sometimes she pushed hard in physical therapy, determined to regain sensation in her legs. Other times she just wailed, wondering why Mommy had her leap off the cliff. The therapist stated that the emotional damage may take longer to heal than the physical ailments. Mother hired her own lawyer. The house received papers claiming visiting rights. Dad crumpled them up and dumped them in the trash before retrieving and smoothing them out, knowing he'd need them for paperwork. Lucas assisted Dad with the installation of security cameras throughout the home. They installed new locks on all of the doors and windows. Dad didn't say it out, but we all knew he was concerned about what Mom would do next. Sophie's 7th week in the hospital resulted in a tiny breakthrough. Throughout therapy, she had tingling in her left foot. The therapist told us not to set our expectations too high, but Sophie smiled for the first time since the accident. Mom's social media messages became increasingly unpredictable. She published old images of herself and Sophie, with remarks about being separated from her baby. She mentioned Dad's business, my school, and even the hospital. Dad documented everything and added it to his growing file. The night before Sophie's discharge, we held a family meeting in her room. Dad said that she would be returning home, but everything will be altered. We had transformed the dining room into a bedroom because she could not climb stairs. A wheelchair ramp was being constructed. Physical therapists would visit the house 3 times a week. Sophie listened carefully before asking if Mommy would be there. Dad knelt beside her bed and pledged to keep her safe. She nodded, entirely trusting him, but I saw terror in her eyes. As we prepared to take Sophie home, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 months. Our family was fractured, possibly beyond repair, but Sophie was still alive, which was all that counted. The real war has barely begun. The wheelchair ramp installation crew arrived at dawn. I looked out the window as they measured and cut lumber, the roar of power tools drowning out the morning birds. Dad oversaw every aspect, measuring angles and testing the surface. Sophie sat in her improvised wheelchair on the porch, her hands holding the armrests. Mom's automobile pulled up across the street. She sat there for 20 minutes, simply watching. Dad noticed but continued working with the crew. When Mom eventually got out and approached, Dad stopped her on the walkway. Their conversation lasted less than a minute before Mom stormed back into her car and drove away. Sophie's first night home was tough. The hospital bed we had leased barely fit into the renovated dining room. She awoke crying 3 times, disoriented and asking for assistance. Every time, Dad or I raced to her side. Grandma slept on the couch nearby, eager to help. The next morning, we had our first home physical therapy session. Olivia, a patient woman, spent an hour working with Sophie. She demonstrated exercises to assist us maintain muscular tone and avoid problems. Sophie fought with each movement, sweat dripping on her forehead. Mom attempted another visit that afternoon. This time, she brought Sophie's favorite aunt, evidently thinking that familial pressure would allow her access. Dad stood hard by the door. The aunt appeared uneasy, caught between family members. After they went, Dad discovered a gift bag on the porch with expensive toys and a note begging for forgiveness. I hesitantly returned to school, apprehensive about abandoning Sophie. My teachers had been apprised of the issue and were providing assignment extensions. During lunch, I spotted Mom's car in the guest parking area. The principal then informed me she attempted to sign me out early, citing a family emergency. Sophie's progression remained modest. The tingle in her left foot fluctuated unpredictably. Sometimes she could wiggle her toes slightly. Other days produced no sensation at all. The physical therapist cautioned us that spinal injuries are unpredictable. Recovery is non-linear. Dad found that Mom had been calling Sophie's doctors, pretending to be his assistant, to obtain medical updates. The hospital tightened its information processes. Following that, only fathers could receive updates, and only in person with proper identification. Lucas spent the weekends assisting his father with modifying the house to accommodate Sophie's needs. They added grab bars to the restroom, expanded entrances and made smooth transitions between rooms. Sophie watched from her wheelchair, occasionally pointing out areas where she required extra support. Mom's tactics evolved. She began sending gifts via delivery services, including cuddly animals, novels, and art equipment. Each parcel had messages expressing her love and minimizing the incident. Dad photographed everything before storing everything in the garage, creating a documentation file. The medical expenditures continued to grow. Even with payment arrangements, the financial hardship was evident. Dad sold his motorcycle and worked more shifts whenever possible. Grandmother contributed from her pension. We made sacrifices together to assist Sophie's rehabilitation. Sophie's emotional condition changed dramatically. Some days, she resembled her former self, laughing at cartoons and playing with toys. Other days, she didn't say anything, staring at her unmoving legs with hollow eyes. The trauma counselor came twice a week and used play therapy to help her cope. Mom showed up for one of Sophie's physical therapy sessions. She had somehow figured out the timetable and waited till Dad went out to take a work call. Olivia abruptly halted the session and wheeled Sophie to her bedroom while I blocked Mom's route. Her anguished pleas rang throughout the house until her father reappeared and let her out. The security cameras proved their worth repeatedly. They caught Mom trying to enter through the back gate at night, testing windows and even attempting to befriend our elderly neighbor in order to gain access to the house. Dad collected the footage and added it to his ever-growing archive. Sophie's scholastic circumstance necessitated cautious planning. She couldn't go back to her normal classroom yet. The district supplied a home tutor 3 days per week. Sophie struggled with the adjustment, missing her pals and her usual routine. We scheduled video conferences with students in an attempt to retain some normalcy. Mom's lawyer wrote more hostile letters requesting access. They questioned Dad's decisions, suggested mistreatment, and threatened legal action. Dad's lawyer answered by providing evidence of Mom's harmful behavior and Sophie's explicit fear of her mother. One morning, I discovered that Mom had slipped dozens of printed photos under our door from before the accident, depicting joyful moments between her and Sophie. The manipulation was evident, yet it ached to witness those memories weaponized. Sophie reached a significant milestone in week 10. She stood with support for 30 seconds. The physical therapist used parallel bars to help her get out of her wheelchair. Her legs shook furiously, but supported her weight. We all sobbed, including Olivia. Mom's social media campaign escalated. She started a blog chronicling her unfair separation from Sophie, portraying herself as a victim of her father's domineering actions. Friends and distant relatives began phoning after only hearing Mom's story. Dad declined to speak publicly, instead focusing on Sophie's care. The financial burden compelled severe judgments. Dad pondered selling the house in favor of something smaller and more accessible to Sophie. Lucas offered to buy Dad's truck and loan it back to him, which moved Dad to tears. Mom is playing lawyer ping pong, while Sophie is learning to walk again. Talk about priorities becoming as twisted as a pretzel in a blender. The security cameras recording her window shopping at midnight like a bargain burglar demonstrate her problem-solving abilities. We were running out of resources. Sophie's improvement has plateaued, which is frustrating. The initial gains ceased, leaving her with little sensation and little functional movement below the knees. The doctors altered their expectations, referring to permanent modifications rather than full healing. Mom tried to ambush us during a medical checkup. She approached the parking garage as her father transported Sophie from the car to a wheelchair. Sophie began hyperventilating, and her entire body shook. Security intervened while I consoled Sophie, but the harm had been done. She refused to leave the house for several days following. Grandma's health deteriorated as a result of her stress. She acquired high blood pressure and required her own medical appointments. The role reversal was difficult. She had come to assist us, but she now needed care for herself. Dad recruited a part-time assistant, which was another expenditure we couldn't afford. Sophie's birthday approached, her first after the catastrophe. She requested a quiet celebration with only her family. My heart ached as she said, "No, Mommy." We arranged a low-key celebration with her favorite cake and a few homemade gifts. Mom discovered the birthday idea on social media. A cousin had casually mentioned it. She arrived with a huge present and demanded entrance. Dad forcefully blocked the door as she yelled accusations. Sophie heard everything from her room and sobbed into her pillow. The event caused Dad to file for a restraining order. The lawyer stated, "We had enough documentation, but the process would take time." Meanwhile, Mom's harassment persisted through every possible channel. Sophie began experiencing nightmares about water. She would wake up gasping, as if she were drowning. The trauma counselor increased their appointments, but progress was gradual. Sophie refused to take baths, instead allowing for brief showers while grasping safety bars. Mom enlisted the help of flying monkeys, as well as friends and family members who believed her story. They called frequently, left messages, and even arrived at our door. Each contact depleted our energy and time, which we required for Sophie's care. Lucas found that Mom was spreading accusations about Dad at work, accusing him of being harsh and domineering. Dad's supervisor, fortunately, recognized the reality and supported him. However, co-workers' murmurs and stares added an additional degree of tension. Sophie's incremental advances became our lifeline. She learned how to shift herself from bed to wheelchair with little aid. She could take a shower while sitting down, using grasp bars. Each small independence win felt tremendous. Mom's attempts became increasingly imaginative and scary. She hired a private detective to photograph our regular activities. She asked Sophie's old babysitter to check on everything. She even phoned my school counselor to express her concerns about my home life. The breaking point occurred during Sophie's swim treatment session. It was her first time near water since the accident, in a carefully supervised therapy setting. Sophie was making progress, floating with help, when Mom emerged through the pool's glass observation window. Sophie noticed her and panicked, breathing water and choking. Sophie was hysterical and fought everybody who tried to touch her, so the therapist had to remove her out right away. Sophie vomited from fright at the end of the session and refused to continue with therapy. Dad eventually snapped. He addressed Mom in the parking lot as I remained with Sophie. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see Dad's controlled rage, Mom's theatrical motions, and finally her speeding away. Dad returned, shaking with wrath. That night we had an emergency family meeting. Dad, Grandma, Lucas and I spoke about alternatives as Sophie slept. The situation was untenable. Mom's rising behavior was impeding Sophie's improvement. We needed a permanent answer. Lucas offered going out of state and starting over somewhere Mom couldn't follow. Grandma was concerned about Sophie's medical team and established care. Dad investigated legal possibilities in other jurisdictions. I just wanted Sophie to feel safer again. Sophie must have overheard as she wheeled herself out. Tears flowed. She begged us not to force her to leave her doctors and her room, which were the only sources of stability she had. We pledged to find another way. Dad spent the following few days on the phone with attorneys, social workers, and advocacy organizations. The restraining order papers progressed slowly. Mom's attorney fought every step, requesting psychological assessments and supervised visitation. Mom's behavior indicated that she was unraveling. Her social media messages become increasingly nonsensical. She shared previous footage of Sophie walking, running, jumping, and all the stuff she had stolen from her. The wickedness was astounding. One afternoon, while Dad was in a legal meeting and Grandmother was napping, I heard a commotion in the backyard. Through the glass, I noticed Mom attempting to demolish a portion of our new fence. She was crying and tearing at the planks with her bare hands. I contacted Dad right away and kept Sophie distracted in her room. Mom's hands had bled on the fence by the time Dad came with Lucas. They discovered her prostrate in the yard, sobbing about wanting to see her baby. The police arrived this time. Mom was brought for a mental evaluation. Dad battled with contradictory emotions. Anger over what she'd done to Sophie, but also grief at her apparent mental decline. We could all feel how terrible everything had gone. Sophie detected a difference in the house that evening. She wondered whether Mama was unwell, and that was why she did such horrible things. We attempted to describe mental health in ways that a 7-year-old might comprehend while validating her anxiety and rage. The psychiatric hold lasted for 72 hours. During that time, we had an experience that we almost forgot about. Peace. Sophie relaxed slightly, participated more in therapy, and even smiled during a video conversation with her schoolmates. When Mom was released, she was given medication and required therapy. Her lawyer called her father about a suggested deal. Mom would remain away if Dad lifted the restraining order. Dad declined, understanding that we required legal protection. Sophie's rehabilitation progressed positively during her mother's absence. She regained sensation in her left foot and could now move her toes deliberately. The physical therapist was cautiously optimistic about the possibility of partial mobility through intense therapy. We used the quiet moment to build better procedures. Sophie began attending online school sessions and maintained regular contact with her teacher and classmates. She joined a virtual support group for kids with spinal injuries. She was slowly creating a new normal. Mom's return to pestering was quick, but different. The drug appeared to reduce her intensity but not her determination. She wrote to Sophie through her lawyer, proposing various concessions, monitored visits, phone calls, and even just letters. Dad spoke with Sophie's trauma counselor about the proposals. The counselor was straightforward. Sophie was not prepared for any contact. The terror was still too raw. The trauma is too recent. Forcing interaction could result in major setbacks. We focused on minor successes. Sophie learned how to prepare basic meals from her wheelchair. She began drawing again, but her pictures were noticeably darker than before. She even smiled at Dad's horrible jokes on occasion. The restraining order hearing approaches. Dad methodically organized evidence and witness statements. Lucas took off work to testify. Even some neighbors offered to talk about what they had witnessed. Mom got a new lawyer, one renowned for aggressive tactics. They filed counter motions, wanted Sophie's medical records, and questioned Dad's parenting abilities. Legal maneuvering was tiresome. Sophie's 8th birthday was 6 months away, but she was already concerned about it. She had me pledged to help Dad keep Mommy away. It crushed my heart to see a 7-year-old contemplating defense measures for her own birthday. Physical treatment produced incremental development. Sophie could stand for 2 minutes with support. She felt sensation in both feet, but her motor control remained limited. Each session tested her limits, leaving her fatigued but determined. Mom's mother, our other grandmother, eventually responded. She had only heard her mother's version of events, and was surprised to learn the truth. She offered to help in any way she could, even if it meant testifying about her daughter's actions. The familial fractures widened. Relatives took sides based on insufficient information. Holiday planning became a minefield. Sophie inquired as to why certain cousins had stopped visiting. Another loss in her transformed world. Dad's employer proposed permanent remote employment to assist with Sophie's care. Flexibility was essential for appointments and therapy sessions. His co-workers planned dinner deliveries and gift vouchers, which were little but meaningful gestures. Sophie developed coping techniques, some of which were helpful, while others were worrisome. She insisted on checking the door locks repeatedly. She kept a whistle beside her bed. She had me vow that I would never leave her alone with Mommy, despite our assurances that this would not happen. The restraining order hearing was postponed when Mom's lawyer requested additional preparation time. The delay irritated everyone, but our lawyer assured us that it would eventually help our case. More time meant more evidence of Mom's ongoing harassment. Sophie's growth inspired everyone. She learned how to manage curbs with her wheelchair. She could shower alone using safety equipment. She even discussed returning to school part-time next year. Mom's attempts to push our boundaries became more inventive. She sent packages to Sophie's friends' homes, hoping they would deliver them. She volunteered at community activities, knowing that we might go. She was everywhere and nowhere, posing a perpetual menace. The day before the rescheduled hearing, Mom made her most daring move yet. She arrived with a moving truck and claimed to be taking her items from the residence. Dad phoned the police and I kept Sophie calm in her room. Mom is employing a moving truck as if it were a custody Uber. I am quite sure that is not how joint property works, but that is fine. The moment right before court is ideal for exacerbating your own case. The officers assessed the situation and barred Mom from entering. She screamed for her rights, her property, and her kid. Sophie heard everything. Despite our attempts, the trauma counselor had to conduct an emergency session that night. As we prepared for the hearing, I considered our new reality. Sophie was stronger than a 7-year-old should have been. Dad had aged years and months. Grandma's health remained frail. We were surviving, but it came at a high cost. The hearing would determine our immediate situation, but the long term was undetermined. Sophie might never walk normally again. Mom's mental health appeared to be deteriorating. Our family was permanently affected by one person's desperate need to be the fun parent. But we had each other. We achieved minor successes and gained optimism. Sophie was alive, becoming stronger, and learning to navigate her new reality. The struggle hadn't ended, but we were still battling. The hearing morning began with unforeseen issues. Mom's new lawyer filed an emergency motion, claiming that Dad had hidden assets. The court adjourned hearings to analyze financial papers. Dad's hands shook as he collected bank statements, tax returns, and receipts for every penny spent on Sophie's care. During the delay, Mom attempted to reach Sophie's physical therapist. She called the rehabilitation center claiming to update insurance information before breaking down in tears about missing her baby. Olivia politely declined to relay messages, but she did notify us about the incident. Sophie's anxiousness increased with the court postponement. She scarcely slept, continually checking to make sure her bedroom door was shut. At 3 a.m., I caught her practicing wheelchair maneuvers and planning escape routes in case Mom got inside. The trauma counselor implemented emergency sessions. 2 days before the rescheduled hearing, Lucas learned that Mom had been photographing our house from various perspectives. The neighbor's security camera saw her estimating the distance from the street to Sophie's window. Dad quickly moved Sophie's bed away from the windows and fitted blackout curtains. The financial examination found that Mom had opened credit cards in Dad's name and maxed out on cash advances. We were unaware that we had $23,000 in debt. Dad's lawyer hurried to add fraud documentation to our case, while Dad spent hours on the phone with credit card companies. Sophie's physical treatment deteriorated. She was always watching the door, so she couldn't concentrate on her workouts. Her progress was reversed. The 2-minute standing record fell to 30 seconds. Olivia recommended suspending sessions until the legal matter was resolved, but Sophie insisted on continuing. Mom's mother paid an unexpected visit and delivered disturbing news. She discovered journals in her mother's apartment that detailed complex preparations to rescue Sophie. The submissions included researched wheelchair-accessible routes to the Canadian border, as well as lists of drugs that might be used to sedate children. Grandma handed everything up to Dad's lawyer. We all stayed awake the night before the hearing. Sophie experienced panic attacks every several hours. Dad paced the home, checking the locks and cameras. I sat in Sophie's doorway, observing her restless slumber. Grandma brewed many glasses of tea. Nobody drank. The court day began with Mom appearing in a wheelchair, claiming stress-induced paralysis. Her lawyer contended that she needed accommodation and understanding, not restriction. The judge requested medical proof. Mom unexpectedly rose up when the bailiff proposed calling the ambulance. Dad delivered our evidence systematically. Security footage, medical data, financial fraud documentation, and witness testimony. The judge's countenance darkened as the pattern revealed. Mom's lawyer tried to interrupt several times but was shut down. Sophie delivered her testimony via video hookup from a secure room. She talked openly about her dread, nightmares, and the accident. When asked if she wanted to see her mother, Sophie shuddered and shook her head. The judge observed her obvious anxiety. Mom's testimony unraveled swiftly. She contradicted herself regarding the quarry event, saying the roof access was secure and that the axe wound was overstated. When Sophie was shown images of her injuries, she blamed her father for not providing adequate supervision. Her lawyer winced visibly. The judge ordered a recess following Mom's outburst about being the victim. During the break, Mom cornered me in the hallway restroom. She gripped my shoulders and begged me to tell the judge that Sophie needed her mother. I yelled, and security removed her. Lucas testified about her mother's attempts to gain entrance to the residence, revealing footage from cameras she was unaware of. The judge observed Mom testing windows at 2 a.m., attempting to pick locks and even offering to bribe the mailman for a key. Each video bolstered our case. Olivia presented expert testimony regarding Sophie's regression during Mom's contact attempts. She added that Sophie's physical improvement was closely tied to her sense of safety. The medical evidence was apparent. Mom's presence actively hampered Sophie's recuperation. Mom's final witness, a friend who had only heard her account, faltered under cross-examination. She revealed that she had never seen Mom with Sophie after the accident and had only heard her stories. She left the stand, visibly distressed, understanding she had been duped. The judge's ruling arrived quickly. Sophie received a permanent restraining order and was not allowed to contact anyone until she reached 18. Mom screamed for her rights, love, and baby. As she approached her father, the bailiffs pushed in closer. Her lawyer physically held her back. Mom made a final attempt outside the courthouse. She broke free from her lawyer and dashed to Dad's car, where Sophie waited. I pushed myself between them as Dad started the engine. Mom stomped on my back, yelling Sophie's name, till cops arrived. Sophie's soft cries broke the silence on the way home. She had heard everything via the car's windows. Dad reached back to clasp her hand, and I caressed her shoulders. Grandma waited on the porch, her face filled with questions that we would address later. That night, Sophie slept soundly for the first time in months. No checking locks, no nightmares, and no terror. Dad sat outside her door anyway, eventually allowing himself to cry. The war was won, but the cost was enormous. Mom's harassment did not stop immediately. She sent letters to various relatives, set up bogus social media sites, and even hired a plane to fly a banner above our house. Every violation was noted and reported. Her personal lawyer eventually dropped her as a client. Sophie's rehabilitation progressed faster without the continual fear. She stood for 5 minutes inside a week. Her toes responded regularly. Olivia sobbed delighted tears when Sophie took an assisted step with parallel bars. Hope crept back into our lives. The financial fallout took several months to address. Dad fought every false charge while handling Sophie's medical bills. Lucas arranged a fundraiser to help meet therapy expenses. The community's support astonished us. People who had witnessed Mom's slide wanted to help. Sophie's emotional mending went slowly. She was still scared by unexpected noises and insisted on seeing who was at the door before opening it. But she smiled more, laughed at movies, and even inquired about going back to school for art class. 6 months after the hearing, Mom was arrested for breaking the restraining order. She had been captured on school grounds during Sophie's virtual graduation ceremony. Her efforts were finally thwarted when she faced criminal accusations. Prison was her new reality. Sophie learned to walk with forearm crutches, defying the initial prediction. Each step required immense effort, but she persevered. We all sobbed when she walked unassisted across her bedroom. She wouldn't sprint or jump again, but she could walk. Dad gradually improved our financial stability. He accepted a promotion that required additional hours but allowed remote work. The balance was not perfect, but Sophie was never without attention or support. We learned how to function as a smaller, stronger family unit. Sophie's 9th birthday arrived peacefully. She requested a poolside party. She is confronting her phobia of water head-on. With her crutches removed, she floated with companions, laughing. The delight on her face wiped away months of anguish. She was healing. Truly healing. Mom's letters from prison remained unanswered. Sophie made her own decision, asking Dad to return them unopened. She focused on moving forward rather than lingering on the past. Her strength astounded everyone who knew our story. House alterations become permanent fixtures. What began as emergency modifications turned into Sophie's unique environment. She decorated her room with artwork she did while recovering. Each item represents her journey from darkness to hope. Sophie returned to school part-time, using a wheelchair and crutches. Her classmates greeted her enthusiastically. She joined both the art club and the student newspaper, discovering new methods to express herself. Normal seemed odd, but possible. Sophie entered an adaptive sports event 2 years after her accident. I saw her race in her wheelchair, determination imprinted on her face. I saw the fighter she had become. She did not win, but her smile as she crossed the finish line was triumphant. Dad fell in love again with a physical therapist from the hospital. She recognized our family's scars and offered compassion and warmth. Sophie approved after considerable consideration, even asking if she may attend the wedding. Healing occurred in unexpected ways. Mom's discharge day came finally, but we were prepared. Legal protections remained in place. Sophie, aged 12, felt secure in her identity despite the experience. She was aware that her mother might try to return, but she also understood that we would protect her. Our family appeared different than before. Smaller, scarred, but unbreakable. Sophie walked on crutches but stood tall. Dad had tension lines but grinned freely. Grandma walked slowly, but she remained our base. I grew up faster than expected, but I found meaning in defending my sister. Mom's urgent need to be the fun parent was costed in Sophie's steps, Dad's gray hair, and Grandma's medicine bottles. Nonetheless, we survived. More than that, we learned to thrive in our new surroundings. Sophie's laughter resumed. Different, yet genuine. That triumph was most important. My sister got pregnant and took my room. My parents sent me away. 10 years later, they called not to apologize but because they needed me. It all started when I was 14. My sister Lena, who was 17 years old at the time and is now 27, has always been the golden child in our family. Our parents, Dad, 45, male, and Mom, 43, female, essentially worshipped the ground she walked on. But things took a turn for the worst when Lena revealed she was expecting her loser boyfriend Zane's 19th child. You'd think my parents would be mad, right? Nope. Mom hugged her and began weeping about how she was going to be a young grandmother and how fortunate our family was. Meanwhile, Dad just sat there staring at his plate, not saying anything. This is a classic dad maneuver. He has never stood up to Mom. I recall sitting at the dinner table with my jaw hanging open. So, are you kidding me? If I had told them I got a girl pregnant at 14, they would have definitely sent me to military school or something. Lena, however, receives a hug and congrats. That pretty much describes my entire childhood. Lena has always been the golden child. When I received a C in math last semester, I lost my gaming privileges for a month. Lena failed 2 classes last year, and her mother stated she was going through a difficult time emotionally, so she purchased her a new phone to cheer her up. The double standards in this household are crazy. I could write a friggin' novel about all the times she received preferential treatment, but I'll spare you the details. Zane, this guy is the epitome of a deadbeat. He's been dismissed from about 4 jobs in the last year. Last Christmas he showed up with a gift for Lena that still had the security tag attached. We all pretended not to notice, but come on buddy, he shows up uninvited at our house, raids the fridge, and talks to my parents as if they owe him anything. He has a silly neck tattoo that says, "No regrets," which is ironic given his lifestyle choices. And he drives a beat-up Honda that makes the entire street smell like burning oil. Zane first came over for supper around 3 months before the pregnancy announcement. I recall him bragging about how he did not believe in college because entrepreneurs do not require degrees. Meanwhile, this person was genuinely working at a car wash while living in his mother's basement. But my folks merely nodded along, as if he were imparting knowledge or something. Dad would periodically give me a look that indicated, "Is this guy for real?" But he never said anything. I attempted to warn my folks about Zane once. I overheard him on the phone in our garden discussing how he had been tossed out of his former girlfriend's home for using her father's credit card. When I told my mother, she simply remarked, "People deserve second chances, honey. Zane is going through a rough patch." A rough patch that seemed to have lasted his entire life. Growing up as the less favored child causes you to distrust yourself. For years I worried if I was simply dreaming things. Perhaps I was the problem. Maybe if I were more like Lena, vivacious, popular and attractive, my parents would treat me the same. I tried so hard to catch their attention. I received good grades, kept my room neat, and even joined activities that I believed would please them. Nothing worked. Lena could burn down the house and they would most likely blame it on defective wiring. I recall this happening when I was 12 and Lena was 15. We had 2 activities on the same night. My scientific fair and her choir concert. Guess which one my folks attended? Yep. They went to see Lena sing one line in a group number while I stood alone next to my renewable energy project, which had taken weeks to construct. My teacher kept asking where my parents were, and I simply claimed they were stopped in traffic. They didn't even bother to stop by afterwards. I won second place, by the way. They never knew or cared. About a week after the baby announcement, my mother held a family gathering, which I knew meant awful news for me. Lena arrived 20 minutes late as usual, complaining about her back pain from carrying a human life. Mom instantly sprang up to buy her a special pregnancy cushion, and I just rolled my eyes. They made us all sit in the living room, with Mom and Dad on the big couch, Lena on the love seat, and me in the dining room's awful wooden chair. Yes, even the sitting arrangements in our house were a metaphor for my position in the family hierarchy. Then they dropped the bomb. They needed to reconsider our living arrangements now that the baby was on the way. Basically, I was being sent to live with my grandparents in Florida so Lena could use my room as a nursery. "It's only temporary," Mom murmured, without looking me in the eye. "Lena needs our support system right now." I looked at Dad, thinking he would say anything to protect me. He simply whispered, "It'll be good for you to spend time with Grandpa and Grandma. They have a nice pool. Like a freaking pool compensates for being evicted from my own home." Lena had the audacity to say, "You should be grateful. At least you don't have to deal with midnight feedings and diaper smell." Then she chuckled and added, "Plus, I've always wanted your room. It gets better sunlight for the baby." I remember sitting there utterly startled. They were talking about my entire future as if I weren't even in the room, as if I were some piece of furniture that could be moved whenever it got inconvenient. I was waiting for someone to remark, "Just kidding," or give an alternative, but it never came. "When exactly am I supposed to leave?" I finally inquired, my voice cracking awkwardly. "Well," Mom began, checking her phone calendar. "Grandma and Grandpa said you could come any time, but we thought maybe after the school year ends. That gives you about 6 weeks to say goodbye to your friends." 6 weeks. Like it was a generous time frame to fully uproot my life. I spent my entire life in our town. All of my buddies were present. My school, my teachers, the comic book store where I spent weekends, and the park where I was just getting good at skateboarding. Everything I knew was here. "Do I get any say in this?" I inquired, already knowing the answer. "Honey," Mom murmured in that faux compassion tone she uses when trying to care. "Sometimes families have to make tough decisions. This is what's best for everyone." "Everyone except me," I was saying. "Don't be so dramatic," Lena murmured, rolling her eyes. "It's not like being sent to prison. Florida has beaches and stuff." I can still recall the exact moment when I realized I was entirely disposable to my family. It was when my mother mentioned that they'd repaint my room, which I'd only gotten to paint dark blue last year after begging for weeks, to a bright cheery yellow for the baby. She was already deciding which of my posters to take down and where the crib would go, all while I sat right there. "But what about my school, my friends, the soccer team tryouts?" I inquired, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "You'll make new friends," Mom dismissively stated. "And Florida schools are probably better anyway." I stared at Lena, hoping for some indication that she felt horrible about the whole thing. She was texting someone and not paying attention to the talk that was truly changing my life. When she eventually looked up, she simply asked, "Can we wrap this up? I'm meeting Zane for dinner." That night, I closed myself inside my room and cried for the first time in years. No one seemed to notice or care. The following few weeks were horrible. Lena began carrying baby supplies into my room before I had even packed. She and her mother went shopping for baby clothing while I was informed we needed to budget when I requested new sneakers for Florida. When I got home from school one day, I saw that my bookshelf had been emptied, with all of my books put into cardboard boxes in the hall. When I inquired what was going on, my mother answered, "Oh, we need the shelf for the baby's things. You weren't taking those books to Florida anyway, right? We'll store them in the attic." Those books were my escape. I'd been saving for years, buying them at yard sales and the used bookstore downtown. Some have comments in the margin, little thoughts I had while reading, and now they were being packed away as if they, and I, mattered nothing. Zane began sticking around more, acting as if he owned our house. One day I saw him wearing my favorite Bulls hoodie. When I confronted him, he simply shrugged and said, "Chill, little man. You won't need warm clothes in Florida anyway." I wanted to slap him so badly. The worst part was that my mother watched what happened and said nothing. Actually, this is not true. She urged me to quit making a fuss when I requested my hoodie back. Zane simply smirked behind her back. I never received that hoodie back, by the way. He probably sold it or lost it somewhere. Things simply got worse. My mom and Lena began having conversations about the baby right in front of me, as if I were invisible. They discussed converting my work area into a changing station or removing my bed to make room for the crib, eradicating all evidence of my presence in that location. I tried to explain what was going on to my pals, but they didn't seem to understand. The majority of them thought moving to Florida sounded good. Dude, you'll live right by the beach. Or perhaps you'll see an alligator. They didn't realize I was effectively being booted out of my own family. My best friend Liam was the only one who seemed to understand how messed up things were. That's some serious man. He remarked when I told him, they can't just ship you off because your sister got knocked up. That's not your fault. It felt good to have someone acknowledge what I was feeling, but it didn't alter anything. I was still being sent away, and no one who could do anything about it seemed concerned. I tried to chat to Dad alone one night when he was organizing his tools in the garage. Dad, this is not fair. Why do I need to leave? Why can't Lena and Zane have their own place? Dad only sighed and appeared fatigued. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices as a family. Your mother thinks this is best for everyone. But what are your thoughts? I pressed. He simply shook his head. What I think doesn't really matter around here, son. You are aware of this. I noticed something in his eyes that night. This dejected expression made me understand he'd stopped fighting my mother years ago. Maybe even before I was born, I was terrified of my future if I stayed in this toxic environment. I made one last-ditch effort to stay. I went to my guidance counselor at school and explained the problem, thinking that she could speak with my parents or something. She was concerned and invited them in for a meeting. But of course, my mother just put on her perfect parent act, telling me how wonderful it was for me to bond with my grandparents and how they were making this sacrifice as a family. The counselor agreed wholeheartedly. As we left her office, Mom hugged my shoulder so hard it hurt and murmured, "Don't ever try to embarrass this family again." The last straw was overhearing Lena on the phone with a friend. She was laughing and saying, "Yeah, it's perfect. The brat is getting shipped off, so the baby gets a whole nursery. Mom has already promised to help with night feedings, so I can still hang out sometimes." That's when I realized I was just an inconvenience to them, a problem they could solve by sending me away. To Lena, I wasn't a sibling whose life was being uprooted. I was just the brat who got in the way of her ideal little setting. The day before my departure, I went to visit my old treehouse in the woods behind our neighborhood. When I was 7 years old, my dad and I built it together. One of the rare occasions that he genuinely spent quality time with me. It wasn't fancy, just plywood and 2x4s, but it had been my particular haven for years. I hadn't been up there in a long time, and I'd outgrown it, but it suddenly felt vital to go one final time. When I arrived, I discovered that someone had taken down the ladder and sprayed Zane was here across the front. The small window was broken, and there were beer cans and cigarette butts inside. I stayed there for hours, staring at this emblem of my youth that had been invaded and destroyed, just like everything else in my life. Nobody made a special dinner for me on my last night at home. Mom was helping Lena register for baby items online. Dad watched television in silence. I purchased a pizza with my own money and ate it alone in my almost empty room, sitting on the floor because my bed had already been disassembled to make place for the crib that had arrived that morning. So, when I was 14, I relocated to Florida to live with my grandparents, just before beginning high school. It wasn't too bad living with my 68-year-old grandmother and 70-year-old grandfather. They treated me much better than my own parents did. However, attending high school in a new state where I knew almost no one was a huge disaster. I was the new kid with an unusual accent. Apparently, I have a northern accent in Florida. On my first day of school, a student asked me where I was from and why I had moved. When I explained that my pregnant sister needed my room, he looked at me as if I had a second head. "Dude, that is messed up," he stated. It was the first time anyone acknowledged that what had occurred to me was not normal or acceptable. I almost cried right there in the cafeteria. The first month was tough. I remained to myself, mostly having lunch alone and returning home directly from school. Grandma would have food available and ask about my day, not just how school went in general, but about my classes and teachers specifically. It was strange to have an adult take an interest in my life. One afternoon, I completely broke down while doing schoolwork at the kitchen table. I started bawling out of nowhere. Grandma sat with me, not saying anything but caressing my back till I could breathe again. Then she said something that I will never forget. "What your parents did was wrong, and you are entitled to be furious about it. But, do not let that anger consume everything good within you." Grandpa was also cool. He had a workshop in the garage where he constructed furniture, and he began showing me how to use the tools. He remarked my hands were good for intricate work. It was the first time I had been complimented on my physical abilities. Dad had never bothered to teach me those stuff. My first DIY project was a basic wooden box with dovetail joints. Grandpa exhibited it on the mantel as if it were a treasured artifact. He proudly displayed it to everyone who came over, telling about how his grandson had made it. I feigned to be embarrassed, but it felt great to have someone proud of me. I rarely heard from my folks back home. Mom would call once a month, make awkward small chat, and then spend 20 minutes showing me images of Lena's baby child, Sophie, on FaceTime. Dad would come on for a minute at the end and say, "Be good to your grandparents," before hanging up. Lena only called or texted when she needed anything. Lena initially called me personally around 3 months after I moved. I was truly thrilled to see her name on my phone. Perhaps she missed me. Nope. She wanted me to persuade grandmother and grandfather to send a larger check for the baby's christening gift. I hung up with her. For my 15th birthday, my parents sent me a card that came 3 days late. Inside, there was a $25 iTunes gift card and a bland letter. Not even, "We miss you." Grandma and Grandpa, on the other hand, threw me a real party with handmade cake and went me to get a good laptop for school. The contrast could not have been clearer. Slowly I began to adjust to my new existence. I joined the computer club at school and met some nice folks who didn't mind that I was the new kid. Jaden, a neighbor of my grandparents, and I began to hang around. His parents divorced and he spent time in both families, so he understood what it was like to be caught up in family turmoil. I learned I was actually rather excellent with computers. My new laptop has become my addiction. I taught myself basic programming, how to debug hardware difficulties, and even some graphic design. Grandpa recognized my fascination and began bringing home broken devices from yard sales for me to experiment with. He'd wink and add, "Either you'll fix it, or it's already broken, so no harm done." When I turned 16, I worked hard in school, received straight A's, joined a computer club, and started working part-time at the local Best Buy. Grandpa taught me about saving and investing. I saved every penny I could. I had a plan in the works to never rely on my parents again, to never be in a position where they could just dispose of me when I became inconvenient. Working for Best Buy was a big changer. Not only did I make good money, but I also learned a lot about different technologies and how to communicate with clients. My manager, Rick, took me under his wing and began assigning me increasingly difficult repair work. "Kids have a talent for discovering problems," he'd tell the other staff. For the first time, I felt valued for my abilities. By junior year, I had made some excellent friends, joined the track team, and began dating a lady named Chloe. She relocated to California for college, but we remained friends. Life was normal. Sometimes I went weeks without thinking about my parents or Lena. The pain never totally went away, but it progressed from a violent stab to a dull ache. I returned home once during my junior year. It was Thanksgiving, and Grandma demanded that we all spend it together. The visit was eye-opening. My former room was completely altered. Pink walls, crib, and changing table. There was no trace that I had ever lived there. Lena lived at home with Sophie, who was then a toddler. Zane was in between jobs, as usual, and spent the entire time I was there playing video games. The craziest thing was how they all pretended nothing had occurred. For me, being sent away was just another routine thing that families did. Mom started saying stuff like, "Oh, we should show you the mall they've renovated since you lived here." As if I'd just been gone at camp or something. Dad felt a little better. He did apologize one night while we were alone, claiming he should have handled things better. However, it was too little, too late. I couldn't wait to return to Florida after that visit. It made me realize that my grandparents' house had become more like a home than my parents had ever been. My parents flew down to see my high school graduation at the age of 18. It was awkward as hell. They pretended that the previous 4 years hadn't happened. Mom kept showing my grandparents' friends pictures of Sophie, who was now 4, and discussing how Lena was such an outstanding young mother despite her difficulties. By the way, challenges refer to the results of her own choices. Zane, for example, moved out when Sophie was 6 months old, then back in, then out again. A pattern he'd repeat nearly a dozen times throughout the years. Or how she was dismissed from 3 different retail jobs for repeatedly phoning in sick. Translation: hung drunk. But in my mother's perspective, Lena was still this poor, struggling angel who deserved constant support and admiration for performing the fundamental parenting that millions of people do every day. At the graduation banquet, I stated that I was not returning home. I was staying in Florida, buying my own house, and launching my own computer repair business. Mom appeared astonished. Dad simply nodded, as if he knew what was coming all along. "But you don't want to come home?" Mom inquired, puzzled. "Your room is still there." It was no longer my room. It was Sophie's room, which I had seen in the background of numerous video conversations. "No," I answered simply. "My home is here now." The hurt expression on her face almost made me giggle. What was she expecting? That I would be glad to return to the location where I had been discarded like old furniture? That I'd like to live as a visitor in what was once my home? Later that night, Grandpa drew me aside and pressed a $5,000 check into my palm. Seed money, he termed it. For your business. Don't tell your grandmother. She thinks we're just helping with first month's rent on your apartment. He gave me a wink and said, I believe in you, kid. That night, I came to a crucial realization. Family is more than simply blood. It's the individuals that create room for you in their lives, recognize your worth, and believe in you. By that measure, my grandparents were more like family to me than my parents and sister ever were. From the ages of 18 to 24, I built my computer repair business from scratch into a reputable IT consulting firm. I've got my own condo, a new car, and actual savings. Not wealthy by any means, but stable and independent. Those first few years on my own were challenging. I resided in a little studio apartment that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs. I worked long hours doing repairs during the day, taking online classes to become certified in various systems at night, and cold calling businesses on weekends to offer my services. Ramen became a food group. Sleep becomes optional. At first I was simply maintaining people's personal computers, eradicating viruses, upgrading hardware, and recovering lost data. I charged less than the big repair companies, so I earned a lot of business from word of mouth. I'd make house calls on my bike, carrying my toolkit in my backpack because I couldn't afford a car at the time. My big break came when I assisted the proprietor of a local accounting firm in recovering data from what they believed to be a fried server. A large IT company offered them thousands of dollars for the job. I fixed it in one afternoon for a few $100s. The owner was so satisfied that he hired me on a monthly retainer to handle all of their IT issues. That was my first actual business contract. Things slowly began to come together. Word of mouth spread. A satisfied consumer would suggest me to another. I hired my first employee at the age of 20, a community college student who was familiar with networks. By the age of 22, I had an actual office space and 3 staff. Now I have a team of 5 people, including a full-time office manager who handles everything I dislike doing. The best thing about starting my own business wasn't the money. It was the control. For the first time in my life, I was making my own decisions and establishing my own rules. Nobody could ship me off, steal my room, or tell me I wasn't important. I was creating something entirely unique to me. Meanwhile, from what I heard, Lena, now 27, was still living at home with Sophie, age 10. She dropped out of community college after one semester due to the demands of having a child. Zane had been in and out of their lives, frequently borrowing money and vanishing for months at a time. Every now and again I'd get updates through holiday cards or the rare phone call from Dad. Zane apparently got another girl pregnant when Sophie was 3, causing some trouble for a period. Then he spent a few months in jail for driving with a suspended license and an unlicensed pistol in the car. Zane is a quality man. Lena had a habit of acquiring jobs and then resigning or being fired within a few months: retail, waitressing, and receptionist. Nothing ever stuck. She was continually making excuses. The manager was harsh. The hours were excessively long. Customers were rude. But based on Dad's thoughtful comments, the true issue was that she simply did not want to work. Why should she? When my folks arrived to bail her out. On Sophie's 7th birthday, I sent her a tablet filled with educational games and e-books. It was certainly more expensive than I should have spent, but I wanted her to have something special. A few days later I received a text from Lena with a photo of Sophie holding the tablet, but the message was simply, she says, "Thanks for the iPad." It wasn't even an iPad, but whatever. Lena did not express a personal thank you, nor did she acknowledge the work I had done to select age-appropriate information. Just the bare minimum. I tried not to let it affect me, but it did. Not because I desired thanks, but because it demonstrated that nothing had changed. Lena remained the same selfish person she had always been, and my parents continued to enable her conduct. My parents, now 53 and 55, were primarily raising Sophie, while Lena worked part-time at a nail salon and socialized with friends. Mom was still making excuses for her, describing her as a young, free spirit who needed time to discover herself. On the rare occasions when we spoke, Dad sounded increasingly exhausted. The last time we spoke, Dad said that he was postponing his retirement because they were still assisting Lena in getting on her feet. He was 55 years old at the time, suffering from back pain and high blood pressure. Instead of supporting his almost 30-year-old daughter and grandchild, he might have considered retiring. I maintained little contact, Christmas cards and birthday texts, that's all. Every year I sent Sophie birthday and Christmas gifts, which were mainly books or educational toys. I had never met her in person, which was strange to think about. I have a niece who I had only seen through screens. Grandma and Grandpa continued to be my primary sources of support. They never treated me like a burden or an afterthought. Grandpa died 2 years ago of a heart attack while sleeping peacefully, and it affected me more than anything I'd felt about my immediate family in years. I still contact Grandma twice a week and go to Sunday supper whenever I can. The day of Grandpa's funeral was one of the hardest days of my life. My parents came down, but Lena did not. She said she couldn't get a sitter for Sophie, which was silly because my parents could have looked after her. The truth was that she didn't want to make the effort. My grandfather, who had essentially saved me when my own family abandoned me, wasn't worth the 6-hour travel to her. At the funeral, my mother tried to make it about her by crying and telling everyone how amazing her father had been, as if she hadn't contacted or seen him in a decade. Dad appeared to be truly heartbroken, and was extremely helpful with the practical arrangements, which I greatly appreciated. After the funeral, I overheard Mom telling one of Grandma's friends that they were concerned about how I was dealing with the loss and had offered to have me stay with them for a bit, which was a complete lie. They had done nothing of the sort. That was Mom for you. Always act for an audience. On my 23rd birthday, Lena sent me a text that simply said, "Happy B-Day, bro." No capitalization, not even my name. I hadn't heard from her for over a year. About an hour later she texted again, asking if I could lend her $800 for auto repairs. I ignored it. She sent 3 more messages over the next week, each one becoming increasingly guilt-ridden, until the final one accused me of leaving the family and not caring about my niece's safety because she needed a reliable car to bring Sophie to school. I eventually responded, "Ask Zane or Mom and Dad. They're your support system, remember?" She didn't text again after that. That is the trouble with folks like Lena. They only recall your existence when they require something from you. 10 years of essentially no communication, and now I'm expected to hand over money because we're family. The audacity was nearly astounding. Meanwhile, I was creating a life that I was proud of. My business was expanding steadily. I had nice pals and dated occasionally. Nothing significant, but not for lack of effort. I was happy, genuinely joyful, in a manner I hadn't been as a kid. Sometimes I imagine a parallel universe in which my parents stood up to Lena and forced her and Zane to figure out their own living arrangement rather than sending me away. Will I be the same person? Would I have established a similar life? It's impossible to tell for sure, but part of me believes that being forced to rely on myself at such an early age made me stronger and more determined. It is not a silver lining I would want on anyone else, but it is something I have accepted. On a Tuesday afternoon, my phone unexpectedly called with Mom's number. I almost didn't respond, but I figured it could be crucial. "Your sister was in a car accident," Mom explained, her voice quivering. "She's okay, but she broke her leg in 3 places and fractured her hip. The doctors say she can't work for at least 6 to 8 months." I waited because I knew there was more to come. Zane left for good. He said he couldn't handle the pressure and moved to California with some girl he met online. "We're struggling with the medical bills and taking care of Sophie. Your father's hours got cut back at work and my arthritis is getting worse." Her tone waned and she spoke slowly. "We were hoping you could come to visit, reunite with the family, and meet Sophie properly. Your father deeply misses you." Translation: the precious kid has passed away. Her deadbeat baby daddy has left her for good. They suddenly remembered that they had another child who could be useful. After hanging up, I sat there for quite some time, staring at my phone. 10 years. It had taken 10 years and a financial crisis for them to reach out in any significant way. Not because they missed me or regretted their actions, but because they needed something from me. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, but then I remembered Sophie, a 10-year-old child caught up in all of this adult drama. None of it was her fault. And to be entirely honest, a small part of me wished they could see who I would become without them. I wanted them to realize that the kid they'd abandoned had established a life for himself that they now needed to rely on. So I called Mom back and said I'd come see in a few weeks. I hired a motel instead of staying at their place. There was no way I was sleeping on their couch, or in what used to be my room. Walking inside my former residence seemed strange. The walls were covered in family photos, the majority of which featured Sophie at various ages with Lena and my parents. I realized there were just 2 images of me: my high school graduation and an ancient school picture from when I was approximately 12. My old bedroom had been transformed into a princess-themed children's room, complete with pink walls and unicorn bedding. Lena sat on the couch, leg in a cast, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up as I walked in. "Oh, you actually came," she remarked, shocked that I was bothered. Mom lingered around uneasily, while Dad held me tightly and muttered, "I've missed you," into my ear. He appears to be considerably older and more worn out. When Sophie returned home from school, things changed. She was bright and curious, with none of Lena's demeanor. After a timid start, she lighted up when she discovered I worked with computers and inundated me with questions about coding and gaming. That night, after Sophie went to bed, they finally got to the topic. They were inundated with medical costs. Lena couldn't work. Zane was gone. They were overdue on both the mortgage and Sophie's private school tuition. "We understand it's a lot to ask," Mom added. "But you're doing so well in business. We were hoping you would be able to help us." Lena finally seemed interested in my existence. "Yeah, bro. Must be nice having all that freedom and money." I looked around at everyone. My entitled sister, who has never faced consequences. My enabling mother, who always placed herself first. And my meek father, who never stood up for me but appeared truly regretful. "I'll help," I finally said. Mom erupted into tears of relief. "But I have conditions," I explained. "I'm not giving anybody a blank check. I'll pay for Sophie's basic expenses and medical bills directly to the providers, not to any of you. And the money goes through Dad, not either of you," I stated, glaring at Lena and Mom. Lena's smile disappeared. "What? You don't trust us or something?" "No, actually, I don't." Mom was upset, but Dad simply nodded, perfectly understanding. "That's fair," Dad replied. "You have no reason to trust us." I also made Lena participate in job training once she was physically capable. She stormed out, but Dad astonished me by admitting that it was more than reasonable. Dad followed me out to my car that night. "I should have stood up for you back then," he whispered quietly. "It was easier to just go along with your mother and Lena. I've regretted it every day since you left." I did not reply. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but I did appreciate the admission. "Take care of Sophie," I instructed. "She deserves better than all this drama." As I drove back to my hotel, I realized I no longer hated them. I simply felt sad for them. They had caused this disaster via their favoritism and enabling, and now they were living in it. Meanwhile, I was free. The neglected son who created himself out of nothing. Perhaps eventually I'll have a meaningful relationship with Sophie. Perhaps even with Dad. But for the time being, their recognition that they needed me after years of making me feel useless was sufficient. Edit. Wow, I appreciate all of the prizes and compliments. To clarify the timeline, I am now 24. I was 14 when I was transported to Florida. Lena was 17 when she became pregnant, and she is now 27 with a 10-year-old daughter. Edit 2. Some people have asked for updates. Yes, I am still helping Sophie with her expenditures, but solely through my father. Lena is still not working, despite physicians clearing her months ago. She's been looking into online programs for about 6 months now. My mother still makes excuses for her. The good news is that I'm starting a relationship with Sophie. We video chat once a week and discuss literature and coding. She's really intelligent, and I'm trying to be the person I needed when I was her age. Edit 3. To some who suggest I should just cut them all off totally, I understand. Believe me. But Sophie is innocent in all of this, and I do not want to punish her for her mother's faults. And no, I did not go back. I see Sophie and Dad on occasion, but my life is now in Florida. Edit 4. Thank you for your wonderful remarks and messages. This blew up much more than I imagined. To some who have asked if I would take Sophie if my parents died, absolutely. She deserves a chance to live a regular life. To everyone who has shared similar stories, I'm sorry you went through it and hope you find peace, as I am. Edit 5. Final update, because this is growing huge. Many of you have asked if my grandmother is aware that I am financially assisting my parents. Yes, she knows and supports my decision to assist Sophie, but she has some harsh comments for my sister that I will not repeat here. Grandma is a wise woman who taught me that being the bigger person doesn't always mean allowing others to walk all over you. It entails setting boundaries while also doing the right thing. I miss you, Grandpa. My mother-in-law faked cheating photos and framed me for theft. When I got pregnant, she wrote, "Now I'll take what's growing inside you." My mother-in-law has always thought I was beneath her son. She dubbed me a gold digger at my birthday dinner when I paid for her food. I threw a tantrum because my $2,500 engagement ring was too pricey. When I realized the difference, she immediately replaced my work clothing with Walmart knockoffs and presented it as proof I was out for my husband's money. But when her kid continued to love me and told her that nothing would change, she got this expression in her eye. The next week, I noticed the same automobile following me everywhere I went, including outside my office, the gym, and the grocery store. When I told my spouse I was being followed, he dismissed it as paranoia. Then one day I returned home and saw a manila folder on my coffee table. Private investigator reports that cover 3 months of my life. Every individual I spoke with, every area I went, was twisted to appear suspicious. The PI noted that my male coworker bought me coffee, indicating that we were having an affair. My trips to the bank provided evidence of concealed accounts. She asked me to find these reports. The jewelry incident occurred during Easter supper. Miel screamed that her grandmother's bracelet was missing as I helped remove the table. She made a huge show of looking before telling us to check purses. Naturally, the bracelet belonged to me. I saw my husband's expression alter as she pulled it out. That glimmer of doubt shattered something in me. Miel gently said that she would not press charges because we all make errors, while the family looked at me as if I were trash. 2 weeks later, she asked me to lunch. I assumed she wanted to apologize, but instead she pushed a check across the table. $50,000. When I didn't react, she wrote another one. $75,000, then $100,000. Every woman has a price, she explained. Name yours. She informed me that she had already done this effectively. I wasn't the most attractive gold digger her son had dated. Apparently the final straw occurred during a family meal in September. Mill had been unusually sweet for 2 weeks, which should have alerted me. She suggested we share images from our recent family beach trip. She connected her phone to the television. The first several images were normal. Then all of a sudden, I found myself kissing another man. I took multiple photos with this stranger at restaurants and places I'd never been to. The shadows were incorrect, and the metadata would have shown that they were false, but nobody noticed while marveling at the images on the large screen. She delivered an entire speech on safeguarding her son and obeying her maternal instincts. It turned out she had already shown these images to my husband's coworkers and acquaintances. She'd shielded him from the truth about his adulterous wife. I tried to defend myself, but she had prepared everyone wonderfully. The trek to my car, with the family whispering behind me, was the longest of my life. My husband requested some space to contemplate during the drive home. That's when I knew that was always her plan. She would never stop since destroying me was a part of her personality. Now, sitting in my car, watching him walk into our house without me, I made a decision. If she wanted to play with family secrets, we would do so. I hired my own investigator to look into her background. It took him 2 months to find the gold mine. Her husband's nephew bore no resemblance to his claimed father, but he did have her characteristic nose and green eyes. The time frame was very interesting. She had given birth to her first child 6 months early, but the cousin was 6 months older. The affair that resulted in him occurred when her spouse was on a business trip. I spent months as the defeated daughter-in-law. I apologized for the misunderstanding over the images. I thanked her for accepting me back into the family. Then, over Thanksgiving, I suggested a festive family activity for Christmas. Those ancestry DNA tests were really popular, and wouldn't it be incredible to trace the family bloodline? I played right into her ego by emphasizing how important family legacy was. She couldn't refuse without appearing suspicious. On Christmas morning I handed out beautifully wrapped 23andMe kits to everyone. Miel tried to grin, but I could see panic in her eyes. The following 2 months were fantastic. The family group chat erupted with enthusiasm as members received their results. Everyone shares their ancestry percentages and locates distant relatives. Then the bomb dropped. The cousin's results revealed a half-sibling match with my husband. My father-in-law peered at the TV, unable to absorb what he was seeing. The remaining family members compared the results and confirmed the match. The mathematics was undeniable. Mill tried to claim that the test was incorrect, but science does not lie like she does. Watching her ideal family image disintegrate as she painfully sought to explain was poetic justice. Her husband had moved out within a week. The divorce papers mentioned infidelity and fraud. The family divided, with the majority cutting her off for her decades of hypocrisy. My spouse often apologized for questioning me. Family gatherings were shifted to our home, where she was not invited. I believed I had won. My birth control failed despite my precautions. The positive pregnancy test arrived at my office with roses. The card said, "Congratulations, grandmother knows." An untraceable text followed. "You took my family. Now I'll take what grows inside you and raise it properly." Blood is blood. She'd been playing a far longer game than I expected. My palms trembled as I glanced at the cards. The office suddenly felt too small and vulnerable. My coworker, Natalie, spotted my expression and ran over, but I waved her away and grabbed my purse. I needed to go home. The driving became a whirl of checking mirrors and making random turns. Each automobile behind me may be one of hers. At home, I locked the door and drew all of the curtains closed. My spouse discovered me seated on the bathroom floor 20 minutes later. The pregnancy test was still in my palm. He knelt alongside me, and I showed him the text. His visage shifted through many emotions before settling on fury. He contacted his mother immediately, but she did not respond. Then his phone vibrated with a message from her. "Congratulations on the baby. I can't wait to be involved every step of the journey." That night, we replaced the locks and built a security system. My husband took time off work to be with me. We altered our habits and avoided typical patterns, but she remained one step ahead. Baby things began arriving at our house with no return address, including a crib and a high chair, all of which were of high quality and impossible to trace. The psychological warfare escalated rapidly. She somehow obtained my work email and emailed congrats to the entire office, revealing my pregnancy before I had even seen a doctor. My supervisor called me aside to discuss maternity leave while I was still processing things. She had snatched my opportunity to communicate the news on my own terms. Then came medical intervention. I arrived at my first prenatal checkup to find she had already called, claiming to be me and attempting to get my medical information. When I checked in, the receptionist looked puzzled because I had just called to cancel. We spent an hour validating my identification and adding password security to my information. My husband confronted her at her apartment. I sat in the car, observing through the window as they argued. She stood there smiling and denying everything. When he returned, his hands shook. She'd decorated a full nursery in her spare room, had already chosen names, and informed him that she'd been consulting with lawyers regarding grandparent rights. The family was divided over how to handle her. Some relatives believed we were overreacting to a grandmother's excitement. Others had seen her ruin enough lives to know better. My father-in-law, who was still recovering from the divorce, volunteered to help in any way he could. He discovered years' worth of covert credit cards and accounts. She has resources we didn't expect. Week after week, her tactics became more daring. She arrived at my workplace with baby gifts, pressuring me to accept them in front of coworkers, or appear ungrateful. She joined every pregnant group and forum I created, constantly commenting directly after me. When I swapped groups, she found them as well. The breaking point occurred during my second trimester. I'd been cautious. Be careful. But somehow she found out about my doctor's visit. She entered the waiting area and took a seat next to me. I just smiled and picked up a parenting magazine. When they called my name, she also stood up. The nurse seems puzzled. As we approached, my mother-in-law kindly explained that she was here to support her daughter-in-law. I clearly informed them that she was not permitted to attend my appointment. She created a spectacle over being excluded from her grandchild's life, which was audible throughout the waiting area. Security had to accompany her out as she wailed about wanting to participate. That night, my husband and I devised a plan. If she chose to escalate, we'd be prepared. We began documenting everything. Every communication, unpleasant gift and appearance. We installed cameras throughout our property, updated all of our passwords, and placed alerts on our credit reports. But she also adapted. Instead, the gifts began to arrive at my husband's job. She befriended our neighbors, often inquiring about me and expressing worry for my health. She volunteered at the hospital where I intended to deliver. She got on the auxiliary board. She countered every move we made. My sister-in-law, Natalie, proved to be an unexpected ally. She had spent years watching her mother operate and was familiar with her tendencies. She cautioned us about the following phase. My mother-in-law attempted to separate me from my support system. Sure enough, anonymous notes began arriving at my acquaintances' houses, warning them of my alleged mental instability during pregnancy. The majority of friends saw through it, but some drifted aloof. My book group suddenly experienced scheduling issues anytime I was able to attend. I'm curious what motivates this mother-in-law to invest so much time and money in this situation. The private investigator, the false images, and now baby items. That's a lot of effort simply because she dislikes her daughter-in-law. My yoga instructor noted that someone had called to express concern about my exercising while pregnant. She was gradually shrinking my universe, until just she remained. Stress was having an impact on my health. My doctor remarked that my blood pressure was high. I couldn't sleep and jumped at every sound. My husband added motion sensors and additional cameras. However, technology could not stop psychological warfare. She was too intelligent to engage in anything that might be legally construed as harassment. Then we found her latest plot by chance. Daniel, my husband's cousin, and her secret son, became horrified with her after discovering the truth. He reached out, hoping to help. He had overheard her on the phone with someone, talking about nursing homes and power of attorney. She was looking into how to declare me incompetent owing to pregnancy-related mental health difficulties. The knowledge about her competency plot chilled my veins. I quickly made an appointment with my obstetrician to document my mental health state. My spouse joined me on every appointment, establishing a record of my stability and sensible decision-making. The doctor took note of everything in my file, knowing the gravity of the issue. After I outlined the harassment pattern, Daniel proved to be beneficial. In the following weeks, he began seeing his mother on a regular basis, claiming to reconcile while gathering intelligence. We learned from him that she had been speaking with a psychiatrist friend regarding postpartum psychosis symptoms, with the intention of using this angle after the birth. She'd even looked into which courts in our area were most sensitive to grandparent rights issues. My husband's work schedule grew unpredictable as he attempted to strike a balance between protecting me and preserving our finances. His mother began showing up at his office during critical meetings, forcing him to pick between his job and dealing with her interruptions. His supervisor, while first tolerant, became impatient with the continuous interruptions. The financial burden exacerbated an already stressful situation. Natalie proposed that we should be on the offense rather than just protecting. She'd been chronicling her mother's actions for years, including details of manipulation tactics used on other family members. We worked together to construct a detailed file that documented a decades-long history of harassment. Former girlfriends that my spouse had lost contact with suddenly made sense. They'd all been turned off by similar campaigns. The 20th week of my pregnancy marked a new development. I awoke to find our mailbox overflowing with pamphlets from adoption organizations. The message was plain. She wanted me to question my abilities to be a mother. My husband put a lockable mailbox the same day, but the psychological harm had already been done. Every usual pregnancy anxiety became exaggerated as I wondered if she was correct about my parenting abilities. Our neighbors became unsuspecting pawns in her scheme. She'd become friends with the elderly couple next door, bringing them groceries and checking in on them every day. They thought she was amazing, not realizing she was asking them for information about our routines. When packages arrived, she'd intercept them in the name of being helpful, always knowing exactly what we'd ordered and when. My work performance decreased as I struggled to focus. Projects that would typically take hours turned into days as I continually watched surveillance footage on my phone. My supervisor expressed concern, which further added to my mother-in-law's story about my failing mental health. I forced myself to compartmentalize and refused to give her fodder for her competency allegations. Daniel learned her next move from a carelessly open laptop. She had been communicating with a family law attorney about creating a paper trail for future custody disputes. Every present she had sent, every attempt to get involved, was being chronicled as proof of her dedication to the baby's well-being. Our resistance to recognize her involvement was turning into paranoid behavior on our side. The baby shower became a battleground. My buddies organized a modest gathering in an attempt to create a regular time amid the pandemonium. She somehow figured out the location and time. She did not disrupt the celebration, this would have been too clear. Instead, she sent an exquisite gift basket which came during the gift opening ceremony and contained considerably more expensive items than anything my friends had donated. The card said, "With love from Grandma," in her unmistakable handwriting. My partner began to sleep poorly, resulting in persistent black circles beneath his eyes. He put an app on his phone that connected to all of our security cameras and checked it obsessively all night. Our connection weakened due to the continual scrutiny. Date nights turned into strategy sessions. Security alerts interrupted romantic moments. She was killing our marriage without ever physically touching either of us. Natalie told us that the holiday season was approaching. Her mother would always escalate during family gatherings, relying on tradition and witnesses to coerce compliance. Thanksgiving loomed like a thundercloud. Family members who had remained neutral began reaching out, urging us to explore reconciliation for the sake of the baby. The pressure increased from all sides. I formed a support group of other women who had faced with nasty in-laws. Their stories offered both comfort and horror. Some had eventually reached an agreement, while others had been fighting for years. They taught me documentation procedures and legal protections I had no idea existed. One woman described how her mother-in-law obtained partial custody by presenting herself as a stable alternative to a neurotic mother. During his reconnaissance visits, my husband's cousin divulged even more troubling information. His mother had been attending grandparents' support groups, portraying herself as a victim of an ungrateful daughter-in-law who was preventing her from seeing her grandchild. She had formed a network of sympathetic allies who were unaware of her actual character. Some even offered to serve as character witnesses if she took legal action. Stress expressed physically as my pregnancy proceeded, headaches became constant companions. When I did get any sleep, it was accompanied by nightmares about her snatching my baby. My doctor prescribed minor anxiety meds that were safe to take throughout pregnancy, which I knew she would use against me if she found out. Every medical decision was weighed against potential legal repercussions. We discovered she'd been volunteering in the hospital's maternity unit for months, gaining favor with the nurses. She had grown particularly close to one nurse who worked in the birth unit, sharing anecdotes about her difficult daughter-in-law, who was keeping her from her grandchild. The notion that she might have allies there at my most vulnerable times threw me into a panic attack that took hours to subside. My husband faced his extended family, explaining the entire extent of her harassment. Some family now recognized the gravity of the situation, while others continued to believe we were overreacting. The family divide worsened as holiday plans became a quagmire of negotiations and bruised feelings. She played the victim brilliantly, a grandmother who only wanted to adore her granddaughter. Financial strain intensified as security measures depleted our funds. The nursery we envisioned became a fortress, with window locks and camera angles taking precedent over decor. Every dollar spent on protection was money not set aside for our child's future. She'd devised a means to rob our child before they were born. Daniel's intelligence collection revealed her most diabolical strategy yet. She had been investigating childcare courses and qualifications, putting together a resume that would make her look to be the more qualified caregiver. She even started working part-time at a daycare center to get professional childcare experience. Every move was planned to put herself in the best possible position if custody was ever called into question. My body altered as the pregnancy progressed, but I was unable to appreciate the miracle of creation. Each kick reminded me of what she intended to steal. Shopping for infant clothes becomes a reconnaissance expedition, looking for her automobile in parking lots and avoiding predictable stores. The thrill of getting ready for our child was marred by constant hypervigilance. Work became my main escape, but even that was threatened. She had began sending flowers to my office on a weekly basis, signed by your beloved mother-in-law. Colleagues thought it was sweet, not realizing the psychological toll each bouquet represented. I couldn't refuse them without appearing ungrateful. Could not explain without appearing paranoid. The 7th month saw a horrifying intensification. I was at home alone when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I noticed a woman I didn't recognize holding official-looking documents. She described herself as a social worker responding to a call regarding an at-risk pregnancy. Someone had indicated that I was in extreme mental distress and would endanger my unborn child. My hands shook as I dialed my husband's number, who had raced home from work. The social worker was professional yet thorough, checking our home and inquiring about my mental health history. She discovered nothing untoward, but the visit became part of the official record. My mother-in-law had devised a strategy to involve authorities without explicitly implicating herself. Natalie used her connections to assist us track down the complaint. It had been made anonymously through a tip line, thus it was hard to determine who had phoned. The social worker's report exonerated us, but the probe remained in the system. With this precedent established, any future complaints will be considered more seriously. She had prepared the groundwork for future attacks while retaining plausible deniability. Social workers are at the door, checking on your mental health. Mother-in-laws are playing chess while everyone else is fixated on checkers. However, utilizing child services as pawns appears to be a new low, even in her playbook. My husband's relationship with his mother had reached a breaking point. He drove to her apartment one evening and returned hours later, emotionally exhausted. She'd spent the entire time playing victim, wailing about missing her grandchild's development and showing him the nursery she'd set up. She even purchased a car seat for her vehicle in case of an emergency. Her illusion was so strong that she appeared to believe she was the aggrieved person. Sleep deprivation became more severe as my due date approached. Every night, I'd wake up several times to check the locks and cameras. My husband started sleeping in shifts, with one of us always on watch. The nursery remained half-finished because we prioritized security over looks. What should have been a period of joyous expectation turned into a siege mindset. She found methods to get around every barrier we put. We stopped her calls, so she utilized burner phones. When our routines changed, she adjusted her surveillance. She would infiltrate even the places we thought were safe. Her resources were limitless. Her determination was absolute. Fighting her was like battling smoke. She would evaporate just to resurface somewhere. The baby shower presents she sent haunted our house. We couldn't use them since we knew they were manipulative. But donating them felt like accepting defeat. They sat in our garage, pricey reminders of her existence. Each fashionable dress and high-end toy reflected another attempt to establish her claim on our child. My already stretched support system began to crack. Friends grew tired of the turmoil, unable to understand why we couldn't simply work things out with her. Family members who had initially backed us began suggesting compromises. The solitude she had planned was working. Even those who believed us became fatigued from the perpetual crisis mode. Daniel advised us that she was intensifying her legal preparations. She hired a well-known family law attorney who specializes in aggressive grandparent rights litigation. Her volunteer efforts, character witnesses and documented gift-giving had created a strong case for a loved grandma who was refused access. Our defensive actions were being seen as proof of our fragility. The 36th week of pregnancy came fresh anxieties. Labor was coming, and despite our efforts, she had established herself at the hospital. We discovered that she had been delivering treats to the maternity unit staff on a weekly basis, and had become a cherished fixture. The caregivers spoke affectionately of the sweet grandma, who only wanted to be a part of her grandchild's life. My spouse visited with hospital security to discuss the incident and provide evidence of the harassment. They pledged to limit her access during the delivery, but their sympathies were evident with the tearful grandma who had showed them baby images and recounted her grief. We recognized we couldn't rely on institutional protection after she spent months developing ties there. Natalie proposed an extreme measure: deliver at a different hospital. We explored facilities in nearby towns, hoping to find one where she didn't have connections. The logistics were hard, increasing the distance between us and our support system, but it appeared to be our only chance for a smooth birth. My mother-in-law must have sensed our plans. The gifts became more frequent, and they now arrive on a daily basis. She supplied the contact information for a professional photographer after having already scheduled and paid for newborn shots. A fancy stroller appeared on our porch. Each present came with cards expressing her love and enthusiasm, providing evidence of a kind grandma being turned down by ungrateful parents. At 37 weeks, stress caused a false labor. As we rushed to the hospital, I became concerned that she was aware of our presence. The contractions subsided after monitoring, but the episode left us shaken. How could we handle real labor while remaining hyper-vigilant against her interference? Our marriage counselor, one of the few professionals who understood the circumstances, assisted us in developing a birth plan that included security precautions. We developed code words, backup plans, and contingencies for a variety of circumstances. What was supposed to be a conversation about pain management and birthing positions turned into a strategic defense planning session. Daniel's final intelligence report before my due date was the most worrisome yet. His mother had been visiting with other estranged grandparents to learn about their success and failures in seeking access. She'd studied case law and knew exactly what evidence courts considered compelling. Her preparation was rigorous, regarding our child as a trophy to be obtained through legal maneuvers. The nursery camera alerted us to movement. One night, my husband watched the feed and saw a package on the windowsill, which had been placed there without triggering our property's motion sensors. Inside was a hand-knitted blanket and a note. Made with love for my grandchild. Soon. The underlying menace in that one word, soon, kept me awake till morning. My due date went, and the waiting grew excruciating. Every twinge may indicate the onset of labor, putting our carefully laid preparations to the test. She appeared to be aware that we were close. Her social media messages became more frequent, discussing the anticipation of becoming a grandma, and eliciting sorrow from friends who were unaware of the real tale. My husband took full family leave, refusing to leave me alone as we neared the end. His determination moved me, but I could see the strain in his tired eyes and rigid shoulders. She'd managed to take even these precious last moments of pregnancy, transforming what should have been an exciting preparation into frightening vigilance. The 39th week delivered a surprise ally. A nurse at our preferred hospital recognized my mother-in-law's photograph from our security briefing. She had previously worked at another hospital where my mother-in-law had volunteered, and she had witnessed similar conduct in another family. Her validation felt like a lifeline. Finally, someone in authority recognized the trend. Labor began at dawn on a Tuesday, 3 days after my due date. As contractions became very intense, my husband carried out our plan. He exclusively called our most trusted allies, using the code phrases we had developed. We took a convoluted path to the hospital, looking for followers. Even while working, I couldn't quit monitoring for potential hazards. The hospital security had our photographs and processes ready. They stationed someone near the maternity ward entrance and gave stern instructions. We'd registered using aliases to keep our true names off public forums. Every safeguard we could think of was in place. But would it be sufficient? Between contractions, I observed my husband coordinating our defense. He examined doors, verified employee identities, and communicated with our security network. What should have been his time to emotionally support me was spent defending against his mother's entrance, which she had also taken from us, the normal birth experience we deserved. As transition approached and the agony worsened, my concentration shifted to the immediate job of safely bringing our kid into this world. The months of tension, fear, and hypervigilance melted in comparison to the primitive urgency of labor. But even at those intense moments, a part of me stayed vigilant, waiting for her to emerge. Our daughter was delivered at 11:47 p.m., perfectly healthy despite the stress of pregnancy. As I held her for the first time, tears streamed down my cheeks. I felt overwhelmed with love and intense protectiveness. She was here. She was ours, and I would do anything to protect her from the lady who wished to take her. My husband's expression as he greeted his daughter cut through months of strain. For a time, we were just new parents, amazed at the tiny life we had made. But reality struck swiftly as he checked his phone to ensure our security network was still operational. Even at our most wonderful time, she cast a shadow. The nurse who recognized my mother-in-law from another hospital went beyond her shift to safeguard us. She kept our names off public notice boards, personally checked every visitor, and formed a safety zone around our small family. Her generosity and understanding of our predicament meant more than she knew. Recovery was a jumble of meal regimens and security screenings. We opted not to release any announcements or images, maintaining a strict information blackout. Family members who had demonstrated trustworthiness were granted brief visits under strict guidelines. The ordinary thrill of welcoming a new baby became a secret operation. On the second night, hospital security stopped my mother-in-law in the parking garage. She'd been circling the hospital for hours, apparently sensing our presence despite our precautions. They escorted her off the property, warning her about trespassing, but we knew she'd only get more inventive with her approaches. The next morning presented a new difficulty. My mother-in-law had identified the room we were in and left a gift basket outside our door. The nurses discovered it during their rounds and brought it in, believing it was from family. Inside, there were pricey baby clothing and a card professing her affection for her grandchild. My husband quickly reported it to security, but the harm had been done. She knew where we were. We chose to leave the hospital early. The doctor cleared us after determining that both the baby and I were healthy enough. My spouse directed the automobile to a secondary door while security created a distraction at the main exit. We tucked our kid into her car seat and slipped away unnoticed, feeling like fugitives from our own home. At home we discovered additional evidence of her existence. Fresh flowers on our porch, a parcel from a high-end baby store. Our security cameras showed she arrived at 3 a.m., carefully avoiding the motion sensors she had obviously pre-mapped. The invasion into our space while we were at our most vulnerable felt deliberate and nasty. The timing of her parking garage arrival while they are still in the hospital appears to be very convenient. How did she find out they were there? Despite the fake names and security procedures, Daniel contacted with vital news. His mother had been meeting with a family court mediator, presenting herself as a caring grandmother attempting to establish contact with her grandchild. She had brought images of the nursery she had planned, receipts for all of the presents we had declined, and character references from her grandparents' support group. The mediator appeared sympathetic to her cause. My husband took swift action. He gathered all of our material into one complete dossier that included the pattern of harassment, security footage, threatening texts, and witness statements from hospital workers who had observed her behavior. We wanted to be prepared in case she pursued legal action, though we hoped to escape that nightmare. The first week at home with our daughter should have been fantastic. Instead, we lived in constant readiness. Every knock on the door sent my heart racing. When neighbors went over to congratulate her, I looked for clues that they had been speaking with her. The baby monitor became another security camera to obsess over. Natalie arrived with alarming intelligence. Her mother was spotted outside our pediatrician's office, presumably attempting to figure out where we'd be taking the baby for checkups. She'd also been begging family members for images of the infant, playing the victim of being cut off from her granddaughter's life. Some relatives began to crumble under her influence. We quickly changed pediatricians, heading to one 3 towns away. The extra distance was exhausting for a newborn, but necessary. We enrolled using privacy protocols and explained the circumstance to the staff. They were understanding, but they clearly believed we were overreacting to family turmoil. If only they knew the whole scope. My mother-in-law has upped her psychological warfare. She created a social media page called Grandmother's Love Denied and posted poetry about missing her grandchild. She never mentioned our names, but family members knew exactly who she meant. Strangers expressed pity in the comments area, unaware of her actual nature. My husband reported the page, but she had been cautious not to post anything that violated the terms of service. Sleep deprivation makes things more difficult. Between feeding times and security concerns, neither of us had more than 2 hours at a time. My husband's paternity leave was running short, and I was frightened of being alone with the baby. Not because I couldn't handle parenting, but because I'd be open to whatever she had planned next. We engaged a security consultant with expertise in stalking situations. He inspected our procedures and offered enhancements, such as a panic button system and greater video coverage. The expense was too expensive, but my father-in-law secretly contributed, feeling bad about the monster he had inadvertently enabled for decades. During those difficult times, his encouragement was invaluable. The consultant also suggested that we change our routines frequently, never leaving at the same time, take various routes, and shop at random stores. Living like Wei was hard, but it was effective. We didn't see her for 3 weeks. I began to hope that she had given up. That hope was dashed when Daniel realized her new plan. She had been making the argument that we were isolating the baby from extended family, resulting in an unhealthy atmosphere. She'd documented every family gathering we'd missed, every invitation we'd turned down. In her story, we were the ones who harmed the child by denying her a relationship with caring relatives. My husband's job worsened due to his distractions and frequent absences. His mother had harmed several business relationships by calling his co-workers and expressing concern about his mental health since becoming a father. His manager approached him for a chat about work-life balance, apparently affected by what she had told them. We chose to go on the offensive. My spouse met with each family member individually and showed them our documents. Some were stunned by the evidence. Others remained convinced that we were overreacting. The DNA revelation exacerbated the family schism, forcing everyone to choose sides. During one of these visits, an aunt shared something important. My mother-in-law had already done this to my husband's father's sister decades earlier. She'd been kicked out of the family because my mother-in-law told everyone she was unstable. The aunt had relocated across the nation and stopped all contact. We followed her down and heard her story, which strangely resembled our own. We felt more assured after implementing this pattern of action. We were not crazy or overreacting. This was her predetermined technique of eradicating threats to her authority. The aunt submitted written testimony regarding her encounter, contributing to our increasing collection of evidence. My mother-in-law must have noticed the tide turning. Her techniques got increasingly desperate. She arrived at my husband's workplace with a lawyer, seeking to discuss grandmother rights. Security removed them, but not before numerous co-workers witnessed the incident. She had succeeded in making our private misery public. That night, we faced a difficult decision. We would relocate not only to another neighborhood, but out of state. My husband began job seeking in cities where we had no connections, and she was unable to follow. It meant quitting our support system, but remaining had become intolerable. Natalie helped us organize the relocation in secret. We utilized her address for job applications, conducted interviews via video chat, and made plans via encrypted communication. It was severe, but considering her resourcefulness, any precaution seemed justified. My husband got a job offer in a place 8 hours away. The position was really better than his present one, with understanding bosses who valued his candor about his family circumstances. We began to arrange our departure like a military operation. We couldn't utilize typical movers since they might be questioned or bribed. Instead, friends helped us pack in the middle of the night, filling a rental truck in shifts. We left furniture behind rather than risking an extended moving period. Our daughter slept through everything, blissfully ignorant of the disruption her presence had caused. The most difficult thing was leaving without saying goodbye to supportive family members. Any information could potentially reach my mother-in-law via the family grapevine. We left letters for Natalie to distribute when we departed, explaining our decision and promising to reconnect when we were settled and safe. On our last night, I strolled around our empty house, holding our daughter in my arms. This was not how I had envisaged beginning our family life. But when I glanced at her serene expression, I knew we were making the correct decision. She deserved to grow up in an environment devoid of manipulation and psychological warfare. We departed at 3 a.m. On a Wednesday, we took a roundabout route that added hours to our trip. My husband frequently checked the mirrors while I soothed our daughter in the back seat. Every automobile that trailed us for more than a few exits set our hearts racing. However, mile by mile, the strain began to subside. Daniel called while we were almost halfway to our destination. His mother had found we had left and was in complete breakdown mode. She had contacted the police, claiming that we had kidnapped her grandchild, but they had immediately rejected her because she couldn't prove any custodial rights. She had driven to our vacant house and stood in the driveway yelling, until neighbors phoned the cops. We arrived in our new city, fatigued, yet eager. The rental house was small, but it had enough security features. We chose it because of the gated yard and away from major traffic. As we brought our daughter across the threshold, I felt a sensation I hadn't had in months. Peace. The first several weeks were filled with pandemonium as everyone adjusted. New physicians, new routines, and new everything. But without the constant danger of her presence, we could finally appreciate our baby. I watched as my hubby gradually relaxed. The tightness in his shoulders dissipated as days went by without incident. We maintained stringent information security. There are no social media or public records updates. All is done through lawyers and encrypted methods. Natalie served as our communication hub for safe family members. We heard from her that my mother-in-law had hired a private investigator to find us. However, we had thoroughly concealed our tracks. 3 months into our new existence, I felt comfortable enough to join a local mothers group. Using only my first name, I started a new support network. The other mothers knew nothing about our past. The familiarity of seeing simply another family adjusting to parenting was soothing. My spouse excelled in his new position. He could now focus on his job without having to deal with continual crises. His confidence returned when he established new professional contacts free of his mother's poison. Watching him become the father he'd always wanted to be, free of her shadow, made me happy. Our daughter grew up in a loving and stable environment. She learned to smile, giggle, and crawl in a family where tension was not constant. Each milestone seemed like a success, not just for her growth, but also for our escape from the toxic environment that threatened to define her early life. Natalie returned after 6 months, conducting rigorous counter-surveillance to ensure she was not followed. She informed me that my mother-in-law's behavior had worsened to the point where even her most ardent supporters were withdrawing. Without us as targets, her instability became impossible to conceal. Several family members had contacted Natalie to apologize for not believing us sooner. The legal threats never resulted in actual court action. Without knowing where we were, she couldn't submit anything significant. Her lawyer evidently dropped her after discovering the severity of her harassment. Talk about playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Hiring a security consultant for family turmoil is a higher level of problem solving. However, calling it family drama is like calling a hurricane mildly breezy weather. She had alienated the grandparent support groups by becoming too harsh for them. As our daughter's first birthday approached, I thought on her journey. We'd lost our house, our town, and the proximity of dear family members. But we had gained something extremely precious. Freedom from a lady who would have ruined our daughter's childhood via manipulation and control. We celebrated quietly, only the 3 of us. A tiny cake, a few presents, and the gift of calm normalcy. As I watched our kid crush icing into her hair, giggling with delight, I knew every sacrifice had been worthwhile. She would grow up with only good affection. We had never experienced the psychological warfare that had nearly destroyed us. My husband and I had risen stronger from the fire of mutual adversity. We'd learned to follow our instincts, safeguard our family, and prioritize peace over exposure to toxins. Our daughter would eventually learn her story, but for now, all she knew was protection and love. The future spread before us, full of possibilities, unhindered by her grandmother's shadow. We'd start new traditions, make new memories, and raise our daughter to be confident and secure. The cost of independence had been steep, but the tranquility we had discovered was invaluable. Our small family had won by choosing distance over devastation and obscurity over concern. In our new lives, we were just another young family in a peaceful neighborhood. No drama, no stalking, and no psychological warfare. Just the lovely, laborious routine of raising a child in peace.